Percy directed the girls through one door to their dormitory, and the boys through another. At the top of the spiral staircase, they were obviously in one of the towers. They found their beds at last. 5 four-posters hung with deep red velvet curtains. Their trunks had already been brought up. Too tired to talk much, they pulled on their pyjamas and fell into bed. "Great food, isn't it?" Ron muttered to Harry through the hangings. "Get off, Scabbers. He's chewing my sheets." Harry was going to ask Ron if he had had any of the treacle tart, but he fell asleep almost at once. Perhaps Harry had eaten a bit too much, because he had a very strange dream. He was wearing Professor Quirrell's turban, which kept talking to him, telling him he must transfer to Slytherin at once, because it was his destiny. Harry told the turban he didn't want to be in Slytherin. It got heavier and heavier. He tried to pull it off, but it tightened painfully, and there was Malfoy, laughing at him as he struggled with it. Then Malfoy turned into the hook-nosed teacher, Snape, whose laugh became high and cold. There was a burst of green light and Harry woke, sweating and shaking. He rolled over and fell asleep again, and when he woke next day, he didn't remember the dream at all. And now we start the sheep barbecue in Harry Potter. We do not. We do not. So that was the last section that we read this evening. Last night. That was the last bit we read up to. And so then we move on to chapter 8, the Potions Master. And if we remember from yesterday, the Potions Master is currently Professor Snape. And so it'll be something to do with Professor Snape now. Okay. There, look. Where? Next to the tall kid with the red hair. Wearing the glasses. Did you see his face? Did you see his scar? Whispers followed Harry from the moment he left his dormitory the next day. People queuing outside classrooms stood on tiptoe to get a look at him, or doubled back to pass him in the corridors again, staring. Harry wished they wouldn't, because he was trying to concentrate on finding his way to classes. There were 142 staircases at Hogwarts, wide, sweeping ones, narrow, rickety ones, some that led somewhere different on a Friday, some with a vanishing step halfway through that you had to remember to jump. Then there were doors that wouldn't open unless you asked politely, or tickled them in the exact right place. And doors that weren't really doors at all, but solid walls just pretending. It was also very hard to remember where anything was, because all seemed to move around a lot. The people in the portraits kept going to visit each other, and Harry was sure the coats of armour could walk. The ghosts didn't help either. It was always a nasty shock when one of them glided suddenly through the door you were trying to open. Nearly Headless Nick was always happy to point new Gryffindors in the right direction. Peeves, the poltergeist, was worth 2 locked doors and a trick staircase if you met him when you was late for class. He would drop waste paper baskets on your head, pull rugs from under your feet, pelt you with bits of chalk and sneak up behind you, invisible, grab your nose and screech, "Got your conch?" Even worse than Peeves, if that was possible, was the caretaker, Argus Filch. Harry and Ron managed to get on the wrong side of him on their very first morning. Filch found them trying to force their way through a door which unluckily turned out to be the entrance to the out-of-bounds corridor on the 3rd floor. He wouldn't believe they were lost, was sure they were trying to break into it on purpose, and was threatening to lock them into the dungeons when they were rescued by Professor Quirrell, who was passing. Filch owned a cat called Mrs. Norris, a scrawny, dust-coloured creature with bulging, lamp-like eyes, just like Filch's. She patrolled the corridors alone. Break a rule in front of her, put just one toe out of line, and she'd whisk off for Filch, who'd appear, wheezing 2 seconds later. Filch knew the secret passageways of the school better than anyone, except perhaps the Weasley twins, and could pop up as sudden as any of the ghosts. The students all hated him, and it was the dearest ambition of many to give Mrs. Norris a good kick. And then, once you managed to find them, there were the lessons themselves. There was a lot more to magic, as Harry quickly found out, than waving your wand and saying a few funny words. They had to study the night skies through their telescopes every Wednesday at midnight and learn the names of different stars and the movements of the planets. 3 times a week, they went out to the greenhouses behind the castle to study herbology, with a dumpy little witch called Professor Sprout, where they would learn how to take care of the strange plants and fungi, and found out what they were used for. Easily the most boring lesson was History of Magic, which was the only class taught by a ghost. Professor Binns had always been very old indeed when he had fallen asleep in front of the staff room fire and got up the next morning to teach, leaving his body behind him. Binns droned on and on while I scribbled down names and dates and got Emmerich the Evil and Ulrich the Oddball mixed up. Professor Flitwick, the charms teacher, was a tiny little wizard who had to stand on a pile of books to see over his desk. At the start of their first lesson, he took the register, and when he reached Harry's name, he gave an excited squeak and toppled out of sight. Professor McGonagall was again different. Harry had been quite right to think she wasn't a teacher to cross. Strict and clever, she gave them a talking to the moment they had sat down in her first class. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she said. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. Then she changed her desk into a pig and back again. They were all very impressed and couldn't wait to get started, but soon realised they weren't going to be changing the furniture into animals for a long time. After making a lot of complicated notes, they were each given a match and started trying to turn it into a needle. By the end of the lesson, only Hermione Granger had made any difference to her match. Professor McGonagall showed the class how it has gone all silver and pointy and gave Hermione a rare smile. The class everyone had really been looking forward to was Defense Against the Dark Arts, but Quirrell's lessons turned out to be a bit of a joke. His classroom smelled strongly of garlic, which everyone said was to ward off a vampire he had met in Romania, and was afraid would be coming back to get him one of these days. His turban, he told them, had been given to him by an African prince as a thank you for getting rid of a troublesome zombie, but they weren't sure they believed his story. For one thing, when Seamus Finnegan asked eagerly to hear how Quirrell had fought off the zombie, Quirrell went pink and started talking about the weather. For another, they had noticed the funny smell hung around the turban, and the Weasley twins insisted that it was stuffed full of garlic as well, so that Quirrell was protected wherever he went. Harry was very relieved to find out that he wasn't miles behind everyone else. Lots of people had come from Muggle families, and like him, hadn't had any idea that they were witches and wizards. There was so much to learn that even people like Ron didn't have much of a head start. Friday was an important day for Harry and Ron. They finally managed to find their way down the Great Hall for breakfast without getting lost once. "What have we got today?" Harry asked Ron as he poured sugar over his porridge. "Double potions with Slytherins," said Ron. "Snape's head of Slytherin House. They say he always favours them. We'll be able to see if it's true." "Wish McGonagall favoured us," said Harry. Professor McGonagall was head of Gryffindor House, but it hadn't stopped her giving them a huge pile of homework the day before. Just then, the post arrived. Harry had got used to this by now, but it had given him a bit of a shock on the first morning when about 100 owls had suddenly streamed into the Great Hall during breakfast, circling the tables until they saw their owners and dropping letters and packages on their laps. Hedwig hadn't brought Harry anything so far. She sometimes flew in to nibble his ear and have a bit of toast before going off to sleep in the owlery with the other school owls. This morning, however, she fluttered down between the marmalade and the sugar bowl and dropped a note on Harry's plate. Harry tore it open at once. "Dear Harry," it said in a very untidy scrawl, "I know you get Friday afternoons off, so would you like to come and have a cup of tea with me around 3? I want to hear all about your first week. Send us an answer back with Hedwig. Hagrid." Harry borrowed Ron's quill, scribbled, "Yes please, see you later," on the back of the note and sent Hedwig off again. It was lucky that Harry had tea with Hagrid to look forward to, because the potions lesson turned out to be the worst thing that had happened to him so far. At the start of term banquet, Harry had got the idea that Professor Snape disliked him. By the end of the first potions lesson, he knew he'd been wrong. Snape didn't dislike Harry, he hated him. Potions lessons took place down in one of the dungeons. It was colder here than up in the main castle, and would have been quite creepy enough without the pickled animals floating in glass jars all around the walls. Snape, like Flitwick, started the class by taking the register, and like Flitwick, he paused at Harry's name. "Ah, yes," he said softly. "Harry Potter. Our new celebrity. Draco Malfoy and his friends Crabbe and Goyle sniggered behind their hands. Snape finished calling their names and looked up at the class. His eyes were black like Hagrid's, but they had none of Hagrid's warmth. They were cold and empty, and made you think of dark tunnels. You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making, he began. He spoke in barely more than a whisper, but they caught every word. Like Professor McGonagall, Snape had the gift of keeping a class silent without effort. As there is little foolish wand-waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you will really understand the beauty of softly simmering cauldron with its shimmering fumes, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind, ensnaring the senses. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stop a death, if you aren't as big a bunch of dunderheads as I usually have to teach. More silence followed this little speech. Harry and Ron exchanged looks with raised eyebrows. Hermione Granger was on the edge of her seat and looked desperate to start proving that she wasn't a dunderhead. Potter, said Snape suddenly. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Powdered root of what? To an infusion of what? Harry glanced at Ron, who looked as stumped as he was. Hermione's hand shot up into the air. I don't know, sir, said Harry. Snape's lips curled into a sneer. Tut tut. Fame clearly isn't everything. He ignored Hermione's hand. Let's try again, Potter. Where would you look if I was told you to find me a Beozar? Hermione stretched her hand as high as she could in the air, as it would go without leaving her seat, but Harry didn't have the faintest idea what Beozar was. He tried not to look at Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, who were shaking with laughter. I don't know, sir. Thought you wouldn't open a book before coming, Potter? Harry forced himself to keep looking straight into those cold eyes. He had looked through his books at the Dursleys, but did Snape expect him to remember everything in 1,000 magical herbs and fungi? Snape was still ignoring Hermione's quivering hand. What is the difference, Potter, between Monk's Hood and Wolfsbane? At this, Hermione stood up, her hand stretching towards the dungeon ceiling. I don't know, said Harry quietly. I think Hermione does. Though, why don't you try her? A few people laughed. Harry caught Seamus's eye and Seamus winked. Snape, however, was not pleased. Sit down, he snapped at Hermione. For your information, Potter, asphodel and wormwood make a sleeping potion, so powerful it's known as the draught of the living dead. Beozar is the stone taken from the stomach of a goat, and it will save you from most poisons. As for Monk's Hood and Wolfsbane, they are the same plant, which also goes by the name of aconite. Well, why aren't you all copying that down? There was a sudden rummaging for quills and parchment. Over the noise, Snape said, and a point will be taken from Gryffindor House for your cheek, Potter. I'm just checking on chat. Thank you for the Hydrate Redeem Senexu. I shall do that now. I shall quickly take a sippy. Thank you very much. I fucking hate him. It's funny because obviously later in the movies and stuff, I absolutely love Snape's character. Probably the best character in the whole story. But at the very beginning, and for the first couple of books, he is horrible to the students, to the main characters. He is horrible. But he is, by far, in my opinion, one of the best characters to be written in the story. Yeah. Okay. Things didn't improve for the Gryffindors as the potions lesson continued. Snape put them all into pairs and set them about mixing up a simple potion to cure boils. He swept around in his long black cloak, watching them weigh dried nettles and crush snake fangs, criticizing almost everyone except Malfoy, whom he seemed to like. He was just telling everyone to look at the perfect way Malfoy had stewed his horned slugs when clouds of acid green smoke and a loud hissing filled the dungeon. Neville had somehow managed to melt Seamus's cauldron into a twisted blob, and their potion was seeping across the stone floor, burning holes into people's shoes. Within seconds, the whole class was standing on their stools, while Neville, who had been drenched in the potion when the cauldron collapsed, moaned in pain as angry red boils sprang up all over his arms and legs. "Idiot boy," snarled Snape, clearing the spilled potion away with one wave of his wand. "I suppose you added the porcupine quills before taking the cauldron off the fire." Neville whimpered as boils started to pop up all over his nose. "Take him up to the hospital wing," Snape spat at Seamus. Then he rounded on Harry and Ron, who had been working next to Neville. "You, Potter, why didn't you tell him to not add the quills?" "Thought he'd make you look good if he got it wrong, did you? That's another point you've lost to Gryffindor." This was so unfair that Harry opened his mouth to argue, but Ron kicked him behind their cauldron. "Don't push it," he muttered. "I've heard Snape can turn very nasty." As they climbed the steps out of the dungeon an hour later, Harry's mind was racing and his spirits were low. He had lost 2 points for Gryffindor in his very first week. Why did Snape hate him so much? "Cheer up," said Ron. "Snape's always looking to take points off Fred and George. Can I come and meet Hagrid with you?" At 5-3, they left their castle and made their way across the grounds. Hagrid lived in a small wooden house on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. A crossbow and a pair of galoshes were outside the front door. When Harry knocked, they heard a frantic scrambling around inside and several booming barks. Then Hagrid's voice rang out, saying, "Back! Bang! Back!" Hagrid's big, hairy face appeared in the crack as he pulled the door open. "Hang on," he said. "Back, Fang!" He let them in, struggling to keep a hold of the collar of the enormous black boarhound. There was only one room inside. Hams and pheasants were hanging from the ceiling. A copper kettle was boiling on the open fire, and in the corner stood a massive bed with a patchwork quilt over it. "Make yourselves at home," said Hagrid, letting go of Fang, who bounded straight at Ron and started licking his ears. Like Hagrid, Fang was clearly not as fierce as he looked. "This is Ron," Harry told Hagrid, who was pouring boiling water into a large teapot and putting rock cakes to the plate. "Another Weasley, eh?" said Hagrid, glancing at Ron's freckles. "I spent half my life chasing your twin brothers away from the forest." The rock cakes almost broke their teeth, but Harry and Ron pretended they enjoyed them as they told Hagrid all about their first lessons. Fang rested his head on Harry's knee and drooled all over his robes. Harry and Ron were delighted to hear Hagrid call Filch "that old git." "And as for that cat, Mrs. Norris, I'd like to introduce her to Fang sometime. Do you know, every time I go up to the school, she follows me everywhere. Can't get rid of her. Filch puts her up to it." "Hello, darling. Welcome in. Hello, hello." "Oh, no, I meant you, cause 47% Snape's story arc." "Ah. Man, book 7 hit me like a truck." Exactly, that's what I mean. That was unfunny for a story development, had me in tears and shambles. This is what I mean. His character development is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. But hello, darling. I hope you're well. Harry told Hagrid about Snape's lesson. Hagrid, like Ron, told Harry not to worry about it, that Snape liked hardly any of the students. "But he seemed to really hate me." "Rubbish," said Hagrid. "Why should he?" Yet Harry couldn't help thinking that Hagrid didn't quite meet his eyes when he said that. "How's your brother Charlie?" Hagrid asked Ron. "I liked him a lot. He's great with animals." Harry wondered if Hagrid had changed the subject on purpose. While Ron told Hagrid all about Charlie's work with the dragons, Harry picked up a piece of paper that was lying on the table under the tea cosy. It was a cutting from the Daily Prophet. "Gringotts break-in latest. Investigations continue into the break-in at Gringotts on the 31st of July. Widely believed to be the work of dark wizards or witches unknown. Gringotts goblins today insisted that nothing had been taken. The vault that was searched had in fact been emptied the same day. But we're not telling you what was in there, so keep your noses out if you know what's good for you," said a Gringotts spokesgoblin this afternoon. Harry remembered Ron telling him on the train that someone had tried to rob Gringotts, but Ron hadn't mentioned the date. "Hagrid," said Harry, "that Gringotts break-in happened on my birthday. It might have been the happening while we were there." There was no doubt about it. Hagrid definitely didn't meet Harry's eyes this time. He grunted and offered him another rock cake. Harry read the story again. The vault that was searched had in fact been emptied earlier the same day. Hagrid had emptied Vault 713, if you could call it emptying, taking out that grubby little package. Had that been what the thieves were looking for? As Harry and Ron walked back to the castle for dinner, their pockets weighed down with rock cakes they'd been too polite to refuse. Harry thought that none of the lessons he had had so far had given him as much to think about as tea with Hagrid. Had Hagrid collected the package just in time? Where was it now? And did Hagrid know something about Snape that he didn't want to tell Harry? Chapter 9. The Midnight Duel. Harry had never believed he would meet a boy he hated more than Dudley, but that was before he met Draco Malfoy. Still, first-year Gryffindors only had potions with Slytherins, so they didn't have to put up with Malfoy much. Or at least, they didn't until they spotted a notice pinned up on the Gryffindor common room which made them all groan. Flying lessons would be starting on Thursday, and Gryffindor and Slytherin would be learning together. Typical, said Harry darkly. Just what I always wanted. To make a fool of myself on a broomstick in front of Malfoy. He'd been looking forward to learning to fly more than anything else. You don't know you'll make a fool of yourself, said Ron, reasonably. Anyway, I know Malfoy's always going on about how good he is at Quidditch, but I bet that's all talk. Malfoy certainly did talk about flying a lot. He complained loudly about first years not getting into the house Quidditch teams, and told long, boastful stories which always seemed to end with him narrowly escaping muggles in helicopters. He wasn't the only one, though. The way Seamus Finnegan told it, he spent most of his childhood zooming around the countryside on his broomstick. Even Ron would tell anyone who'd listen about the time he almost hit a hang glider on Charlie's old broom. Everyone from wizarding families talked about Quidditch constantly. Ron had already had a big argument with Dean Thomas, who shared their dormitory, about football. Ron couldn't see what was exciting about the game with only one ball, where no one was allowed to fly. Harry had caught Ron prodding Dean's poster of West Ham football team, trying to make the players move. Neville had never been on a broomstick in his life, because his grandmother had never let him near one. Privately, Harry felt she had good reason, because Neville managed to have an extraordinary number of accidents, even with both feet on the ground. Hermione Granger was almost as nervous about flying as Neville was. This was something you couldn't learn by heart out of a book. Not that she hadn't tried. At breakfast on Thursday, she bored them all stupid with flying tips she'd got out the library, a book called Quidditch Through the Ages. Neville was hanging on to her every word, desperate for anything that might help him hang on to his broomstick later. But everybody else was very pleased when Hermione's lecture was interrupted by the arrival of the post. Welcome in, Lurkady. I hope you're doing well, mate. Welcome, welcome. Harry hadn't had a single letter since Hagrid's note, something that Malfoy had been quick to notice, of course. Malfoy's eagle owl was always bringing him packages of sweets from home, which he opened gloatingly at the Slytherin table. A barn owl brought Neville a small package from his grandmother. He opened it excitingly and showed them a glass ball the size of a large marble, which seemed to be full of white smoke. It's a remember-all, he explained. Gran knows I forget things. This tells you if there's something you've forgotten to do. Look, you hold it tight like this, and if it turns red... Oh, his face fell because remember-all had suddenly glowed scarlet. You've forgotten something. Neville was trying to remember what he'd forgotten when Draco Malfoy, who was passing the Gryffindor table, snatched the remember-all out of his hand. Harry and Ron jumped to their feet. They were half hoping for a reason to fight Malfoy. Professor McGonagall, who could spot trouble quicker than any teacher in the school, was there in a flash. What's going on? Malfoy's got my remember-all, Professor. Scowling, Malfoy quickly dropped the remember-all back on the table. Just looking, he said, and he sloped away with Crabbe and Goyle behind him. At 33 that afternoon... Oh, sorry, 33. Read it the wrong way around. At 3:30 that afternoon, Harry, Ron, and the other Gryffindors hurried down the front steps to the grounds for their first flying lesson. It was a clear, breezy day, and the grass ripped from underneath their feet as they marched down sloping lawns towards a smooth lawn on the opposite side of the grounds to the Forbidden Forest, whose trees were swaying darkly in the distance. The Slytherins were already there, and so were 20 broomsticks lying in neat lines on the ground. Harry had heard Fred and George Weasley complain that their school brooms, saying that some of them started to vibrate if you flew too high, or always flew slightly to the left. Their teacher, Madam Hooch, arrived. She had short, grey hair and yellow eyes like a hawk. "Well, what are you all waiting for?" she barked. "Everyone stand by your broomstick. Come on, hurry up." Harry glanced down at his broom. It was an old and some of the twigs stuck out like odd angles. "Stick out your right hand over your broom," called Madam Hooch at the front, "and say, 'Up! Up!'" everyone shouted. Harry's broom jumped into his hand at once, but it was one of the few that did. Hermione Granger's hand simply rolled over the ground, and Neville's hand hadn't moved at all. Perhaps brooms, like horses, could tell when you were afraid, thought Harry. There was a quaver in Neville's voice that said only too clearly that he wanted to keep his feet on the ground. Madam Hooch then showed them how to mount their brooms without sliding off at the end, and walked up and down the rows, correcting their grips. Harry and Ron were delighted when she told Malfoy he'd been doing it wrong for years. "Now, when I blow my whistle, you kick off from the ground hard," said Madam Hooch. "Keep your brooms steady, rise a few feet, and then come straight back down by leaning forward slightly. On my whistle, 3, 2, but Neville, nervously and jumpy and frightened of being left on the ground, pushed off hard before the whistle had touched Madam Hooch's lips. "Come back, boy," she shouted, but Neville was rising straight up like a cork shot out of a bottle. 12 feet, 20 feet. Harry saw his scared white face look down from the ground, falling away, saw him gasp, slip sideways off the broom, and wham! A thud and nasty crack, and Neville lay face down on the grass in a heap. His broomstick was still rising higher and higher, and started to drift lazily towards the Forbidden Forest and out of sight. "Broken wrist," Harry heard her mutter. "Come on, boy, it's all right. Up you get." She turned to the rest of the class. "None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave those brooms where they are, or you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch. Come on, dear." Neville, his face tear-streaked, clutching at his wrist, hobbled off with Madam Hooch, who had her arm around him. No sooner were they out of earshot than Malfoy burst into laughter. "Did you see his face, great lump?" The other Slytherins joined him. "Shut up, Malfoy," snapped Parvati Patil. "Ooh, sticking up for Longbottom," said Pansy Parkinson, a hard-faced Slytherin girl. "Never thought you'd like a fat little crybabies, Parvati." "Look," said Malfoy, darting towards and snatching something out of the grass. "It's that stupid thing Longbottom's gran sent him." The Remember-All glittered in the sun as he held it up. "Give it here, Malfoy," said Harry, quietly. Everyone stopped talking to watch. Malfoy smiled nastily. "I think I'll leave it somewhere for Longbottom to collect. How about up a tree?" "Give it here," Harry yelled. But Malfoy had leapt onto his broomstick and taken off. He hadn't been lying. He could fly well. Hovering level with the topmost branches of an oak, he called, "Come and get it, Potter." Harry grabbed his broom. "No," shouted Hermione Granger. "Madam Hooch told us not to move. You'll get us all in trouble." Harry ignored her. Blood was pouring in his ears. He mounted the broom and kicked hard against the ground, and up he soared. Air rushed through his hair, and his robes whipped out behind him. And in a rush of fierce joy, he realized he'd found something he could do without being taught. This was easy. This was wonderful. He pulled his broomstick up a little to take it even higher, and heard screams and gasps of girls back on the ground, and an admiring whoop from Ron. He turned his broomstick sharply to face Malfoy in midair. Malfoy looked stunned. "Give it here," Harry called, "or I'll knock you off that broom." "Oh yeah?" said Malfoy, trying to sneer, but looking worried. Harry knew, somehow, what to do. He leant forward and grasped at the broom tightly in both hands, and it shot towards Malfoy like a javelin. Malfoy only just got out of the way in time. Harry made a sharp about turn and held the broom steady. A few people below were clapping. "No Crab and Goyle up here to save your neck, Malfoy," said Harry. The same thought seemed to have struck Malfoy. "Catch it if you can, then," he shouted, and he threw the glass ball high into the air and streaked back towards the ground. Harry saw, as though in slow motion, the ball rise up in the air and then start to fall. He leant forward and pointed his broom handle down. Next second, he was gathering speed in a steep dive, racing the ball. Wind whistled in his ears, mingled with the screams of people watching. He stretched out his hand. A foot from the ground, he'd caught it, just in time to pull his broom straight. And he toppled gently against the grass, and with the Remembrall clutched safely in his fist. Harry Potter! His face sank faster than his just dived. Professor McGonagall was running towards them. He got to his feet, trembling. Never in all my time at Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall was almost speechless with shock. Her glasses flashed furiously. How dare you? Might have broken your neck. It wasn't his fault, Professor. Be quiet, Miss Patel. But Malfoy, that's enough. Mr. Weasley, Potter, follow me, now. Harry caught sight of Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle's triumphant faces as he left, walking numbly in Professor McGonagall's wake as she strode towards the castle. He was going to be expelled, he just knew it. He wanted to say something to defend himself, but there seemed to be something wrong in his voice. Professor McGonagall was sweeping along without even looking at him. He had to jog to keep up. Now he'd done it. He hadn't even lasted 2 weeks. He'd be packing his bags in 10 minutes. What would the Dursleys say when he turned up on the doorstep? Up the front steps, up the marble staircase inside, and still Professor McGonagall didn't say a word to him. She wrenched open the doors and marched along corridors with Harry trotting miserably behind her. Maybe she was talking to him, maybe taking him to Dumbledore. He thought of Hagrid, expelled but allowed to stay on as a gameskeeper. Perhaps he could be Hagrid's assistant. His stomach twisted as he imagined it. Watching Ron and the others becoming wizards while he stumped around on the grounds carrying Hagrid's bag. Professor McGonagall then stopped outside of a classroom. She opened the door and poked her head inside. Excuse me, Professor Flitwick, could I borrow wood for a minute? Wood? Thought Harry, bewildered. Was wood a cane she was about to use on him? But Wood turned out to be a person, a burly fifth-year boy who came out of Flitwick's class looking confused. Follow me, you two, said Professor McGonagall, and then they marched on up the corridor, Wood looking curiously at Harry. In here. Professor McGonagall pointed them into a classroom which was empty except for Peeves, who was busy writing rude words on the blackboard. Out, Peeves, she barked. Peeves threw the chalk into a bin while clanging loudly, and he swooped out, cursing. Professor McGonagall slammed the door behind him and turned to face the two boys. Potter, this is Oliver Wood. Wood, I found you a seeker. Wood's expression changed from puzzlement to delight. Are you serious, Professor? Absolutely, said Professor McGonagall crisply. The boy's a natural. I've never seen anything like it. Was that your first time on a broomstick, Potter? Harry nodded silently. He didn't have a clue what was going on, but he didn't seem to be expelled, and some of the feeling started coming back to his legs. He caught that thing in his hand after a 50-foot dive, Professor McGonagall told Wood. Didn't even scratch himself. Charlie Weasley couldn't have done it. Wood was now looking as though all his dreams had come true at once. Ever seen a game of Quidditch before, Potter? He asked excitedly. Wood's captain of the Gryffindor team, Professor McGonagall explained. He's just the build for a seeker too, said Wood, now walking around Harry and staring at him. Light. Speedy. We'll have to get him a decent broom, Professor. A Nimbus 2000 or a Clean Sweep 7, I'd say. I shall speak to Professor Dumbledore and see if we can't bend the first year rule. Heaven knows we need a better team than last year. Flattened in the last match by Slytherin. Couldn't even look Severus Snape in the face for weeks. Professor McGonagall peered sternly over her glasses at Harry. I want to hear you're training hard, Potter, or I may change my mind about punishing you. Then she suddenly smiled. Your father would have been very proud, she said. He was an excellent Quidditch player himself. You're joking? It was dinner time. Harry had just finished telling Ron what had happened when he'd left the grounds with Professor McGonagall. Ron had a piece of steak and kidney pie halfway to his mouth, but he had forgotten all about it. Seeker, he said, but first years never. You must be the youngest house player in about. A century, said Harry, shoveling pie into his mouth. He felt particularly hungry after the excitement of the afternoon. Wood told me. Ron was so amazed, so impressed. He just sat and gaped at Harry. I start training next week, said Harry. Only don't tell anyone. Wood wants to keep it a secret. Hello, Timmy. Welcome in. Hope you're doing well. A day start while I'm in the shower. Time to start over. Oh, shit. We're going to have to fucking play catch-up now, aren't we? See this? Second Neil. Oh. Yes, ban Niels. Welcome in, Timmy. I tell you, we're going to win that Quidditch Cup for sure this year, said Fred. We haven't won since Charlie left, but this year's team is going to be brilliant. You must be good, Harry. Wood was almost skipping when he told us. Anyway, we've got to go. Lee Jordan reckons he's found a new secret passageway out of the school. Bet it's that one behind the statue of Gregory the Smari. And we found it in our first week. See you. Fred and George had hardly disappeared when someone far less welcome turned up. Malfoy, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle. Have a last meal, Potter. When are you getting the train back to the Muggles? You're a lot braver now that you're back on the ground and you've got your little friends with you, said Harry coolly. There was, of course, nothing at all little about Crabbe and Goyle, but as the high table was full of teachers, neither of them could do more than crack their knuckles and scowl. I'd take you on any time of my own, said Malfoy. Tonight, if you want. Wizard's duel. Wands only. No contact. What's the matter? Never heard of a wizard's duel before, I suppose? Of course he has, said Ron, wheeling around. I'm his second. Who's yours? Malfoy looked at Crabbe and Goyle, sizing them up. Crabbe, he said. Midnight all right? We'll meet you in the trophy room, and that's always unlocked. When Malfoy had gone, Ron and Harry looked at each other. What is a wizard's duel, said Harry. And what do you mean, you're my second? Well, a second's there to take over if you die, said Ron casually, getting started at the last on his cold pie. Catching the look on Harry's face, he quickly added, but people die only in proper duels, you know, with real wizards. The most you and Malfoy will be doing is send sparks at each other. Neither of you knows enough magic to do any real damage. I bet he expected you to refuse anyway. And what if I wave my wand and nothing happens? Throw it away and punch him on the nose, Ron suggested. Excuse me? They both looked up. It was Hermione Granger. Can't a person eat in peace in this place, said Ron. Hermione ignored him and spoke to Harry. I couldn't help overhearing what you and Malfoy were saying. Bet you could, Ron muttered. And you mustn't go wandering around the school at night. Think of the points you'll lose Gryffindor if you're caught. And you're bound to be. It's really very selfish of you. And it's really none of your business, said Harry. Goodbye, said Ron. All the same, it wasn't what you'd call a perfect end to a day. Harry thought as he laid awake much later, listening to Dean and Seamus falling asleep. Neville wasn't back from the hospital wing. Ron had spent all evening giving him advice such as, if he tries to curse you, you'd better dodge it, because I can't remember how to block them. There was a very, very good chance they were going to get caught by Filch or Mrs. Norris, and Harry felt he was pushing his luck, breaking another school rule today. On the other hand, Malfoy's sneering face kept looming up and about out of the darkness. This was his big chance to beat Malfoy face to face. He couldn't miss it. 11:30, Ron muttered at last. We better go. They pulled on their dressing gowns, picked up their wands, and crept across the tower room, down the spiral staircase and into the Gryffindor common room. A few embers were still glowing in the fireplace, turning all the armchairs into hunched black shadows. They had almost reached the portrait hole when a voice spoke from the chair nearest them. I can't believe you're going to do this, Harry. The lamp flickered on. It was Hermione Granger, wearing a pink dressing gown and a frown. You! Said Ron furiously. Go back to bed! I almost told your brother, Hermione snapped. Percy, he's a prefect. He'd put a stop to this. Harry couldn't believe anyone was could be so interfering. Come on, said Ron. He pushed open the portrait of the fat lady and climbed through the hole. Hermione wasn't going to give up that easily. She followed Ron through the portrait hole, hissing at them like an angry goose. Don't you care about Gryffindor? Do you only care about yourselves? I don't want Slytherin to win the House Cup, and you'll lose all the points I got from Professor McGonagall for knowing about switching spells. Go away! All right, but I warned you. You just remember that when I said, when you're on the train home tomorrow, you're so... But what they were, they didn't find out. Hermione had turned to the portrait of the fat lady to get back inside and found herself facing an empty painting. The fat lady had gone on a nighttime visit and Hermione was locked out the Gryffindor Tower. Now what am I going to do? She asked shrilly. That's your problem, said Ron. We've got to go. We're going to be late. They hadn't even reached the end of the corridor when Hermione caught up with them. I'm coming with you, she said. You are not. Do you think I'm going to stand out here and wait for Filch to catch me? And if he finds all three of us, I'll tell him the truth, that I was trying to stop you and you can back me up. You've got some nerve, said Ron loudly. Shut up, both of you, Harry said sharply. I heard something. It was a sort of snuffling. Mrs. Norris? Breathed Ron, squinting through the dark. It wasn't Mrs. Norris. It was Neville. He was curled up on the floor, fast asleep, but jerked suddenly awake as they crept nearer. Thank goodness you found me. I've been out here for hours. I couldn't remember the new password to go to bed. Keep your voice down, Neville. The password's pig snout. But it won't help you now. The fat lady's gone off somewhere. How's your arm? Said Harry. Fine, said Neville, showing them. Madame Pomfrey mended it in about a minute. Good. Well, look, Neville, we've got to be somewhere. We'll see you later. Don't leave me, said Neville, scrambling to his feet. I don't want to stay here alone. The bloody Baron's been passed twice already. Ron looked at his watch and then glared furiously at Hermione and Neville. If either of you get us caught, I'll never rest until I've learnt that curse of the bogies Quirrell told us about and used it on you. Hermione opened her mouth, perhaps to tell Ron exactly how to use the curse of bogies, but Harry hissed at her to be quiet and beckoned them all forward. They flitted along the corridor, striped with the bars of moonlight through the high windows. At every turn, Harry expected to run into Filch or Mrs. Norris. But they were lucky. They sped up a staircase to the third floor and tiptoed towards the trophy room. Malfoy and Crabbe weren't there yet. The crystal trophy cases glimmered where the moonlight caught them. Cups, shields, plates, and statues winked silver and gold in the darkness. They edged along the walls, keeping their eyes on the doors at either end of the room. Harry took out his wand in case Malfoy leapt in and started at once. The minutes crept by. He's late. Maybe he's chickened out, Ron whispered. Then, a noise in the next room made them jump. Harry had only just raised his wand when they heard someone speak, and it wasn't Malfoy. Sniff around, my sweet, they might be lurking in a corner. It was Filch speaking to Mrs. Norris. Horror-struck, Harry waved madly at the other three to follow him quickly as possible. They scurried silently towards the door away from Filch's voice. Neville's robes had barely whipped around the corner when they heard Filch enter the trophy room. They're in here somewhere, they heard him mutter, probably hiding. This way, Harry mouthed to the others, and petrified, they began to creep down a long galley full of suits of armour. They could hear Filch getting nearer. Neville suddenly let out a frightened squeak and broke into a run. He tripped, grabbed Ron around the waist, and the pair of them toppled right into a suit of armour. The clanging and crashing were enough to wake the whole castle. Run! Harry yelled at the four of them, sprinting down the galley. Not looking back to see whether Filch was following, they swung around the doorpost and galloped down one corridor, then another. Harry in lead without any idea where they were or where they were going. They ripped through the tapestry and found themselves in a hidden passageway. Hurtled along it, came out near their charms classroom, which they knew was miles from the trophy room. I think we've lost him, Harry panted, leaning against the cold wall and wiping his forehead. Neville was bent double, wheezing and spluttering. I told you, Hermione gasped, clutching at the stitch in her chest. I told you. We've got to get back to the Gryffindor Tower, said Ron, quickly as possible. Malfoy tricked you, Hermione said to Harry. You realise that, don't you? He was never going to meet you. Filch knew someone was going to be in the trophy room. Malfoy must have tipped him off. Harry thought she was probably right, but he wasn't going to tell her that. Let's go. It wasn't going to be that simple. They hadn't gone more than a dozen paces when a doorknob rattled and something came shooting out the classroom in front of them. It was Peeves. He caught sight of them and gave a squeal of delight. Shut up, Peeves, please. You'll get us thrown out. Peeves cackled. Wandering around at midnight, ickle thirsties. Tut, tut, tut. Naughty, naughty, you'll get caughty. Not if you don't give us away, Peeves, please. Should I tell Filch I should? Said Peeves in a saintly voice. But his eyes glittered wickedly. It's for your own good, you know. Get out the way, snapped Ron, taking a swipe at Peeves, but was a stupid mistake. Students out of bed, Peeves bellowed. Students out of bed down the Charms corridor. Ducking under Peeves, they ran for their lives, ran to the end of the corridor where they slammed into a door and it was locked. This is it, Ron moaned, as they pushed helplessly at the door. We're done for. This is the end. They could hear footsteps. Filch running as fast as he could towards Peeves' shouts. Oh, move over, Hermione snarled. She grabbed Harry's wand, tapped the lock and whispered, Hello, Hamora. And the lock clicked to open, and the door swung open. They piled through it, shut it quickly, and pressed their ears against it, listening. Which way did they go, Peeves? Filch was saying. Quick to tell me. Say please. Don't mess me about, Peeves. Where did they go? Shan't say nothing if you don't say Peeves. Say please, said Peeves, in his annoying sing-song voice. All right, please. Nothing. Ha 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 ha, told you I wouldn't say anything if you didn't say please. Ha ha. And they heard the sound of Peeves whooshing away and Filch cursing in rage. He thinks this door is locked, Harry whispered. I think we'll be okay. Get off, Neville. For Neville had been tugging on the sleeves of Harry's dressing gown for the last minute. What? Harry turned around and saw quite clearly what, for a moment, he was sure he walked into a nightmare. This was too much, on top of everything that had happened so far. They weren't in a room as they had supposed. They were in a corridor, the forbidden corridor on the 3rd floor. Now they knew why it was forbidden. They were looking straight into the eyes of a monstrous dog, and a dog which filled the whole space between the ceiling and floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling eyes, mad eyes, 3 noses, twitching and quivering in their direction, 3 drooling mouths, saliva hanging in slippery ropes from the yellowish fangs. It was standing quite still, all 6 eyes staring at them, and Harry knew the only reason they weren't already dead was that their sudden appearance had taken them by surprise. But it was quickly getting over that. There was no mistaking what those thunderous growls meant. Harry groped for the doorknob between Filch and death. He'd take Filch. They fell backwards. Harry slammed the door shut, and they ran. They almost flew back down the corridor. Filch must have hurried off to look for them somewhere else, because they didn't see him anywhere. But they hardly cared. All they wanted to do was put as much space between themselves and that monster. They didn't stop running until they reached the portrait of the fat lady on the 7th floor. Where on earth have you been? Where on earth have you all been? She asked, looking at their dressing gowns hanging off their shoulders and their flushed, sweaty faces. Never mind that. Pig snout, panted Harry, and the portrait swung open. They scrambled into the common room and collapsed, trembling into armchairs. It was a while before any of them said anything. Neville, indeed, looked as if he'd never speak again. What do you think they're doing, keeping a thing like that locked up in the school? Said Ron finally. If any dog needs exercise, that one does. Hermione had got both her breath and bad temper back again. You don't use your eyes, any of you, do you? She snapped. Didn't you see what it was standing on? The floor, Harry suggested. I wasn't looking at its feet. I was too busy looking at its heads. No, not the floor. It was standing on a trap door. It's obviously guarding something. She stood up, glaring at them. I hope you're pleased with yourselves. We could have been killed, or worse, expelled. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to bed. Ron stared at her, his mouth open. No, we don't mind, he said. You'd think we dragged her along, wouldn't you? But Hermione had given Harry something else to think about as he climbed back into bed. The dog was guarding something. What had Hagrid said? Gringotts was the safest place in the world for something you wanted to hide, except perhaps Hogwarts. It looked as though Harry had found out where the grubby little package from the Vault 713 was. Chapter 10. I'm also going to take a quick sippy. I've finished my drink. Oi, no. Chapter 10. Halloween. Malfoy couldn't believe his eyes when he saw Harry and Ron were still at Hogwarts the next day, looking tired but perfectly cheerful. Indeed, by the next morning, Harry and Ron thought that meeting the 3-headed dog had been an excellent adventure, and they were quite keen on to have another one. In the meantime, Harry filled Ron in about the package that seemed to have been moved from Gringotts to Hogwarts, and they spent a lot of time wondering what could possibly need such a heavy protection. It's either really valuable or really dangerous, said Ron. Or both, said Harry. But, as they all knew for sure about the mysterious object, was that it was about 2 inches long, they didn't have much chance of guessing what it was without further clues. Neither Neville or Hermione showed the slightest interest in what lay underneath the dog and the trap door. All Neville cared about was never going near the dog again. Hermione was now refusing to speak to Harry and Ron, but she was such a bossy know-it-all that they saw this as an added bonus. All they really wanted now was for a way of getting back at Malfoy, and to their great delight, just such a thing arrived in the post about a week later. As the owls flooded in the Great Hall as usual, everyone's attention was caught at once by a long, thin package carried by 6 large screeching owls. Harry was just as interested as everyone else to see what was in this large parcel, and was amazed when the owls soared down and dropped it right in front of him, knocking his bacon on the floor. They had hardly fluttered out of the way when another owl dropped a letter on top of the parcel. Harry ripped open the first letter, which was lucky because it said, "Do not open the parcel at the table. It contains your new Nimbus 2000, but I don't want everyone knowing you've got a broomstick, or they'll all want one. Oliver Wood will meet you tonight on the Quidditch pitch at 7 o'clock for your first training session. Professor M. McGonagall." Harry had difficulty hiding his glee as he handed the note to Ron to read. "A Nimbus 2000, Ron moaned enviously. "I've never even touched one." They left the hall quickly, wanting to unwrap the broomstick in private before their first lesson, but halfway across the entrance hall, they found the way upstairs barred by Crabbe and Goyle. Malfoy seized the package from Harry and felt it. "That's a broomstick," he said, throwing it back to Harry with a mixture of jealousy and spite on his face. "You'll be for it this time, Potter. First years aren't allowed them." Ron couldn't resist it. "It's not any old broomstick," he said. "It's a Nimbus 2000. "What did you say you've got at home, Malfoy? A Comet 260? Ron grinned at Harry. "Comets look flashy, but they're not the same league as Nimbus." "What would you know about it, Weasley? You couldn't even afford half the handle," Malfoy snapped back. "I suppose you and your brothers have to save up for it, twig by twig." Before Ron could answer, Professor Flitwick appeared, and Malfoy's Professor Flitwick appeared at Malfoy's elbow. "Not arguing, I hope, boys," he squeaked. "Potter's been sent a broomstick, Professor," said Malfoy quickly. Yes, that's right," said Professor Flitwick, beaming at Harry. "Professor McGonagall told me all about the special circumstances, Potter. And what model is it?" "A Nimbus 2000, sir," Harry said, fighting not to laugh at the look of horror on Malfoy's face. "And it's really thanks to Malfoy here that you've got it," he added. Harry and Ron headed upstairs, smothering their laughter at Malfoy's obvious rage and confusion. "Well, it's true," Harry chortled as they reached to the top of the marble staircase. "If he hadn't stolen Neville's Remember-All, I wouldn't be in the team." "So I suppose you could think it's a reward for breaking the rules," came an angry voice from just behind them. Hermione was stomping up the stairs, looking disapprovingly at the package in Harry's hand. "I thought you weren't speaking to us," said Harry. "Yes, don't stop now," said Ron. "It's doing us so much good." Hermione marched away with her nose in the air. Harry had a lot of trouble keeping his mind on the lessons that day. He kept wandering up to the dormitory, where his new broomstick was laying under his bed, or straying off to the Quidditch pitch where he'd be learning how to play that night. He bolted his dinner that evening without noticing what he was eating, and then rushed upstairs with Ron to unwrap the Nimbus 2000 at last. "Wow!" Ron sighed as the broomstick rolled onto Harry's bedspread. Even Harry, who knew nothing about different brooms, thought it looked wonderful. Sleek and shiny, with a mahogany handle, it had a long tail of neat, straight twigs, and Nimbus 2000 written in gold near the top. As 7 o'clock drew nearer, Harry left the castle and set off towards the Quidditch pitch in the dusk. He'd never been inside the stadium before. Hundreds of seats were raised in stands around the pitch so that the spectators were high enough to see what was going on. At either end of the pitch were 3 golden poles with hoops on the end. They reminded Harry of little plastic sticks Muggles children blew bubbles through, except they were 50 feet high. Too eager to fly again to wait for Wood, Harry mounted his broomstick and kicked off from the ground. What a feeling! He swooped in and out of the goalposts and then sped up and down the pitch. Nimbus 2000 turned wherever he wanted his lightest touch. Hey, Potter, come down! Oliver Wood had arrived. He was carrying a large wooden crate under his arm. Harry landed next to him. Very nice, said Wood, his eyes glinting. I see what McGonagall meant. You really are a natural. I'm just going to teach you the rules this evening. Then you'll be joining team practice 3 times a week. He opened the crate. Inside were 4 different sized balls. Right, said Wood. Haha, balls. Now, Quidditch is easy enough to understand. Even if it's not too easy to play. There are 7 players on each side. 3 of them are called chasers. 3 chasers, Harry repeated, as Wood took out the bright red ball about the size of a football. This ball's called the quaffle, said Wood. The chasers throw the quaffle to each other and try to get it through one of those hoops to score a goal. 10 points for every time the quaffle goes through one of these hoops. Follow me? The chasers throw the quaffle and put it through the hoops to score, Harry recited. So, that's sort of like basketball on broomsticks with 6 hoops, isn't it? What's basketball? Said Wood curiously. Never mind, said Harry quickly. Now, there's another player on each side who's called the keeper. I'm the keeper for Gryffindor. I have to fly around the hoops and stop the other team from scoring. 3 chasers, 1 keeper, said Harry, who was determined to remember it all. And they play with the quaffle. Okay, got that. So, what are they for? He pointed at the 3 balls left inside the box. I'll show you now, said Wood. Take this. These 2 are bludgers. He showed Harry 2 identical balls, jet black and slightly smaller than the red quaffle. Harry noticed that they seemed to be straining to escape the straps holding them inside the box. Stand back, Wood, warned Harry. He bent down and freed one of the bludgers. At once, the black ball rose high into the air and pelted straight at Harry's face. Harry swung at it with the bat to stop it breaking his nose and sent it zigzagging away into the air. It zoomed around their heads and then shot at Wood, who dived on top of it and managed to pin it to the ground. See? Wood panted, forcing the struggling bludger back into the crate and strapping it down safely. The bludgers rocket around trying to knock players off their brooms. That's why you have 2 beaters on each team. The Weasley twins are ours. It's their job to protect their side from the bludgers and try and knock them towards the other team. So, you think you've got all that? 3 chasers try and score with the quaffle. The keeper guards the goalposts. The beaters keep the bludgers away from their team. Harry reeled off. Very good, said Wood. Have the bludgers ever killed anyone? Harry asked, hoping he sounded offhand. Never at Hogwarts. We've had a couple of broken jaws. Nothing worse than that. Now, the last member of the team is the Seeker. That's you. And you don't have to worry about the quaffle or the bludgers. Unless they crack my head open. Don't worry, the Weasleys are more than a match for the bludgers. I mean, they're like a pair of human bludgers themselves. Wood reached into the crate and took the 4th and last ball. Compared to the quaffle and the bludgers, it was tiny, about the size of a large walnut, and it was bright gold and had fluttering silver wings. This, said Wood, is the golden snitch, and it's the most important ball of the lot. It's very hard to catch because it's so fast and difficult to see. It's the Seeker's job to catch it. You've got to weave in and out of the chasers, beaters, bludgers, and quaffle, and get to it before the other team's Seeker, because whichever Seeker catches the snitch wins their team an extra 150 points, and so they nearly always win. That's why Seekers get fouled so much. A game of Quidditch only ends when the snitch is caught, so it can go on for ages. I think the record is 3 months. They had to keep bringing on substitutes so the players could get some sleep. Well, that's it. Any questions? Harry shook his head. He understood what he had to do all right. It was doing it which was the problem. We won't practice with the snitch yet, said Wood, carefully shutting it back inside the crate. It's too dark. We might lose it. Let's try and get you out with a few of these. He pulled a bag of ordinary golf balls out of his pocket, and a few minutes later, he and Harry were up in the air, Wood throwing the golf balls as hard as he could in every direction for Harry to catch. Harry didn't miss a single one, and Wood was delighted. After half an hour, night had really fallen, and they couldn't carry on. That Quidditch Cup will have our name on it this year, said Wood happily, as they trudged back up the castle. I wouldn't be surprised if you turn out better than Charlie Weasley, and he could have played for England if he hadn't gone off chasing dragons. Perhaps it was because he was now so busy, what with Quidditch practice 3 evenings a week on top of all of his homework, but Harry could hardly believe when he'd realised that he'd already been at Hogwarts for 2 months. The castle felt more like home than Privet Drive had ever done. His lessons, too, were becoming more and more interesting now that they had mastered the basics. On Halloween morning, they broke into a delicious smell of baking pumpkins wafting through the corridors. Even better, Professor Flitwick announced, in charms, that he thought they were ready to start making objects fly, something they'd all been dying to try since they'd seen him make Neville's toad zoom around the classroom. Professor Flitwick put the class into pairs and practice. Harry's partner was Seamus Finnegan, which was a relief because Neville had been trying to catch his eye. Ron, however, will be working with Hermione Granger. It was hard to tell whether Ron or Hermione was angrier about this. She hadn't spoken to either of them since the day Harry's broomstick had landed. Now don't forget that nice wrist movement we've been practicing, squeaked Professor Flitwick, perched on top of his pile of books as usual. Swish and flick, remember? Swish and flick. And saying the magic words properly is very important too. Never forget Wizard Barufio, who said S instead of F, and found himself on the floor with a buffalo on his chest. It was very difficult. Harry and Seamus swished and flicked, but their feather they were supposed to be sending skywards just lay on the desktop. Seamus got so impatient that he prodded it with his wand and set fire to it. Harry had to put it out with his hat. Ron, at the next table, wasn't having much more luck. Wingardium Leviosa, he shouted, waving his long arms like a windmill. You're saying it wrong, Harry heard Hermione snap. It's Wingardium Leviosa, making the gar nice and long. You do it then if you're so clever, Ron snarled. Hermione rolled up her sleeves over her gown, flicked her wand and said, Wingardium Leviosa. With there, the feather rose off the desk, hovered about 4 feet above their heads. Oh, well done, cried Professor Flitwick, clapping. Everyone see here, Miss Granger's done it. Ron was in a very bad temper by the end of class. It's no wonder no one can stand her, he said to Harry as they pushed their way into the crowded corridor. She's a nightmare, honestly. Leviosa, yeah. Love that. Swish and flick. Someone knocked into Harry as they hurried past him. It was Hermione. Harry caught a glimpse of her face and was startled to see that she was in tears. I think she heard you. So? Said Ron. But he looked a bit uncomfortable. She must have noticed she's got no friends. Hermione didn't turn up to the next class and wasn't seen all afternoon. On their way down to the Great Hall for the Halloween feast, Harry and Ron have overheard Parvati Patil telling her friend Lavender that Hermione was crying in the girls' toilets and wanted to be left alone. Ron looked still more awkward at this, but a moment later they had entered the Great Hall, where the Halloween decorations put Hermione out of their minds. 1,000 live bats fluttered from the walls and ceilings, and 1,000 more swooped over the tables in low black clouds, making the candles in the pumpkins stutter. The feast appeared suddenly on the golden plates as it had at the start of term banquet. Harry was just helping himself into a jacket potato when Professor Quirrell came sprinting into the hall, his turban askew and terror on his face. Everyone stared as he reached Professor Dumbledore's chair, slumped against the table and gasped, "Troll in the dungeons! Thought you ought to know." He then sank to the floor in a dead faint. There was an uproar. It took several purple firecrackers exploding from the end of Professor Dumbledore's wand to bring silence. "Prefect," he rumbled, "lead your houses back to the dormitories immediately." Percy was in his element. "Follow me. Stick together. First years. No need to fear the troll if you follow my orders. Stay close behind me now. Make way, first years coming through. Excuse me, I'm a prefect." "How could a troll get in?" Harry asked as they climbed the stairs. "Don't ask me. They're supposed to be really stupid," said Ron. "Maybe Peeves let it in for a Halloween joke." They passed different groups of people hurrying in different directions. As they jostled their way through a crowd of confused Hufflepuffs, Harry suddenly grabbed Ron's arms. I've just thought. Hermione. What about her? She doesn't know about the troll. Ron bit his lip. Oh, all right, he snapped, but Percy'd better not see us. Ducking down, they joined the Hufflepuffs going the other way, slipped down a deserted side corridor and hurried off towards the girls' toilet. They had just turned the corner when they heard quick footsteps behind them. Percy, hissed Ron, pulling Harry behind a large stone griffin. Peering around it, however, they saw not Percy, but Snape. He crossed the corridor and disappeared from view. What's he doing? Harry whispered. Why isn't he down in the dungeon with the rest of the teachers? Search me. Quietly as possible, they crept along the next corridor after Snape's fading footsteps. He's heading for the 3rd floor, Harry said, but Ron held up his hand. Can you smell something? Harry sniffed a foul stench, reached his nostrils, a mixture of old socks and a kind of public toilet no one seemed to have cleaned. And then they heard it, a low grunting and the shuffling footfalls of gigantic feet. Ron pointed. At the end of the passage to the left, something huge was moving towards them. They shrank into the shadows and watched as it emerged into the patch of moonlight. It was a horrible sight. 12 feet tall, its skin was dull, granite grey. It was great lumpy body like a boulder with a small bald head perched on top like a coconut. It had short legs thick as tree trunks with flat, horny feet. The smell coming from it was incredible. It was holding a huge wooden club which it dragged along the floor because its arms were so long. The troll stopped next to the doorway and peered inside. It waggled its long ears, making up its tiny mind, then slouched slowly into the room. The key's in the lock, Harry muttered. We could lock it in. Good idea, said Ron nervously. They edged towards the open door, mouth dry, praying the troll wasn't about to come out of it. With one great leap, Harry managed to grab the key and slam the door and lock it. Yes! Flushed with their victory, they started to run back up the passage, but as they reached the corner, they heard something that made their hearts stop. A high, petrified scream, and it was coming from the chamber they'd just locked up. Oh no, said Ron, pale as the bloody Baron. It's the girls' toilets! Harry gasped. Hermione! They said together. It was the last thing they wanted to do, but what choice did they have? Wheeling around, they sprinted back to the door and turned the key. Fumbling in their panic, Harry pulled the door open and they ran inside. Hermione Granger was shrinking against the wall opposite, looking as if she was about to faint. The troll was advancing on her, knocking the sinks off the wall as it went. Confuse it, Harry said desperately to Ron, and seizing a tap, he threw it as hard as he could against the wall. The troll stopped for a few feet from Hermione. It lumbered around, blinking stupidly, to see what had made that noise. Its mean little eyes saw Harry. It hesitated, then made for him instead, lifting its club as it went. Oi, pea-brain, yelled Ron from the other side of the chamber, and he threw a metal pipe at it. The troll didn't even seem to notice the pipe hitting its shoulder, but it heard the yell and paused again, turning its ugly snout towards Ron instead, giving Harry time to run around it. Come on, run! Run! Harry yelled at Hermione, trying to pull her towards the door, but she couldn't move. She was still flat against the wall, her mouth open with terror. The shouting and the echoes seemed to be driving the troll berserk. It roared again and started towards Ron, who was nearest and had no way to escape. Harry then did something that was both very brave and very stupid. He took a great running jump and managed to fasten his arms around the troll's neck from behind. The troll couldn't feel Harry hanging there, but even a troll will notice if you stick a long bit of wood up its nose. Harry's wand had still been in his hand when he jumped, and it had gone straight up one of the troll's nostrils. Howling with pain, the troll twisted and flailed its club, with Harry clinging on for dear life. Any second the troll was going to rip him off or catch him in a terrible blow with a club. Hermione had sunk to the floor in fright. Ron pulled out his own wand. Not knowing what he was going to do, he heard himself cry at the first spell that came to his head. Wingardium Leviosa! The club flew suddenly out of the troll's hand, rose high and high up into the air, turned slowly over, and dropped, with a sickening crack onto its owner's head. The troll swayed on the spot, then fell flat on its face, with a thud that made the whole room tremble. Harry got to his feet. He was shaking and out of breath. Ron was standing there with his wand still raised, staring at what he'd done. It was Hermione who spoke first. "Is it dead?" "I don't think so," said Harry. "I think it's just been knocked out." He bent down and pulled his wand out the troll's nose. It was covered in what seemed to be a lumpy grey blue. Ugh, troll bogies. He wiped it on the troll's trousers. A sudden slamming of loud footsteps made the three of them look up. They hadn't realised what a racket they had been making, but of course, someone downstairs must have heard the crashes and the troll's roars. A moment later, Professor McGonagall had come bursting into the room, closely followed by Snape, with Quirrell bringing up the rear. Quirrell took one look at the troll, let out a faint whimper, and sat quickly on the toilet, clutching at his heart. Snape bent over the troll. Professor McGonagall was looking at Ron and Harry. Harry had never seen her look so angry. Her lips were white. Hopes of winning 50 points from Gryffindor faded quickly from Harry's mind. "What on earth were you thinking of?" said Professor McGonagall, with a cold fury in her voice. Harry looked at Ron, who was still standing with his wand in the air. "You're lucky you weren't killed. Why aren't you in your dormitory?" Snape gave Harry a swift, piercing look. Harry looked at the floor. He wished Ron would put his wand down. Then a small voice came out of the shadows. "Please, Professor McGonagall. They were looking for me." "Miss Granger!" Hermione had managed to get to her feet at last. "I went looking for the troll because I thought I could deal with it on my own. You know, because I've read all about them." Ron dropped his wand. Hermione Granger telling a downright lie to a teacher? "If they hadn't found me, I'd be dead by now." Harry stuck his wand up its nose, and Ron knocked it out with his own club. "They didn't have time to come and fetch anyone. It was about to finish me off when they arrived." Harry and Ron tried to look as though the story wasn't new to them. "Well, in that case," said Professor McGonagall, staring at the three of them, "Miss Granger, you foolish girl, how could you think of tackling a mountain troll on your own?" Hermione hung her head. Harry was speechless. Hermione was the last person to do anything against the rules, and here she was, pretending she had, to get them out of trouble. It was as if Snape had started handing out sweets. "Miss Granger, 5 points will be taken from Gryffindor for this," said Professor McGonagall. "I'm very disappointed in you. If you're not hurt at all, you better get off to Gryffindor Tower." Suddenly, the students are finishing the feast in their houses. Hermione left. 50 fucking points for Gryffindor. Taken away. Not even given, but taken away. "Professor Dumbledore will be informed of this. You may go." They hurried out of the chamber and didn't speak at all until they had climbed up 2 floors. It was a relief to be away from the smell of the troll, quite apart from anything else. Hydrate? I shall do that in just 1 second. We've nearly finished this page. We should have got more than 10 points, Ron grumbled. 5, you mean, once you've taken off Hermione's. Oh, wait, sorry, I fucking missed a bit here. Professor McGonagall turned to Harry and Ron. "Well, I still say you were lucky, but not too many first years could have taken on a full-grown mountain troll. You each win Gryffindor 5 points. Professor Dumbledore will be informed of this. You may go." They hurried out the chamber and didn't speak at all until they climbed up 2 floors. It was a relief to be away from the smell of the troll, quite apart from anything else. "We should have got more than 10 points, Ron grumbled. 5, you mean, once she's taken off Hermione's." "Good of her to get us out of trouble like that," Ron admitted. "Mind you, we did save her." "She might not have needed saving if we hadn't locked that thing in with her," Harry reminded him. They had reached the portrait of the fat lady. "Pig snout," they said, and entered. The common room was packed and noisy. Everyone was eating the food that had been sent up. Hermione, however, stood alone by the door, waiting for them. There was a very embarrassed pause. Then, none of them looking at each other, they all said thanks, and hurried off to get their plates. But From that moment on, Hermione Granger became their friend. There are some things that you can't share without ending up liking each other, and knocking out a 12-foot mountain troll is one of them. We're just starting chapter 11. I will quickly go grab a drink and have a sippy. So 2 moments. Okay, I am back. Apologies for that. I need to grab myself a new drinky drink because I finished my other one. No screaming in class. Minus 3 points to the teachers. Oh no. Bitch, you got expelled 10 years ago. It was expelled for a lifetime, so I pulled a Harry Potter and got back. I don't know what makes perfect. Where's our drink? I mean, it's just some water. It's just it's a small bottle of water. So nothing too spectacular. English. Nothing too spectacular. It's just water. Yeah. Sparkling water? Absolutely not. No. None of that. No. Just normal water. Plain unflavoured water with bubbles. Not even bubbles. No. Just normal water. No fucking sparkling water. None of the TV static in a bottle. No. Not that one. No. Okay. Chapter 11. Quidditch. As they entered November, the weather turned very cold. The mountains around the school became icy grey, and the lake... Oh my god, I can't fucking English. And the lake like chilled steel. Every morning, the ground was covered in frost. Hagrid could be seen from the upstairs windows, defrosting broomsticks on the Quidditch pitch, bundled up in a long moleskin overcoat, rabbit fur gloves, and enormous beaver skin boots. The Quidditch season had begun. On Saturday, Harry would be playing in his first match after weeks of training. Gryffindor versus Slytherin. If Gryffindor won, they would move up into second place in the House Championship. Hardly anyone had seen Harry play because Wood had decided that, as their secret weapon, Harry should be kept, well, secret. But the news that he was playing Seeker had leaked out somewhere, and Harry didn't know which was worse, people telling him he'd be brilliant, or people telling him he'd be running around underneath him, holding a mattress. It was really lucky that Harry now had Hermione as a friend. He didn't know how he'd gotten through all of his homework without her. What with all the last-minute Quidditch practice Wood was making them do. She had also lent him a Quidditch Through the Ages, which turned out to be a very interesting read. Harry learned that there were 700 ways of committing a Quidditch foul, and that all of them happened during a World Cup match in 1473. That Seekers were usually the smallest and fastest players, and that most serious Quidditch accidents seemed to happen to them. That, although people rarely died playing Quidditch, referees had been known to vanish and turn up months later in the Sahara Desert. Hermione had become a bit more relaxed about breaking rules since Harry and Ron had saved her from the mountain troll, and she was much nicer for it. The day before Harry's first Quidditch match, the three of them were out in the freezing courtyard during break, and she had conjured them up a bright blue fire, which could be carried around in a jam jar. They were standing with their backs to it, getting warm, when Snape crossed the yard. Harry noticed at once that Snape was limping. Harry, Ron and Hermione moved closer together to block the fire from view. They were sure they wouldn't be allowed. Unfortunately, something about their guilty faces caught Snape's eye. He limped over. He hadn't seen the fire, but he seemed to be looking for a reason to tell them off anyways. "What's that you've got there, Potter?" It was Quidditch Through the Ages. Harry showed him. "Library books are not to be taken outside the school," said Snape. "Give it to me. 5 points from Gryffindor." "He's just made that rule up," Harry muttered angrily as Snape limped away. "Wonder what's wrong with his leg." "Dunno, but I hope it's really hurting him," said Ron bitterly. I don't need sparkling water. It's fucking minging. Yeah, it is. It's fucking minging. But Sheepy needs sparkling. I don't need sparkling water. I do not. Sparkling water just makes me go, "Ugh," every time I go near it. So sparkling water is not on the table for me. Unfortunately. Unfortunately. The Gryffindor common room was very noisy that evening. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat together next to a window. Hermione was checking Harry and Ron's charms homework for them. She would never let them copy. How will you learn? But by asking her to read it through, they got the right answers anyway. Harry felt restless. He wanted Quidditch through the ages back, to take his mind off his nerves about tomorrow. Why should he be afraid of Snape? Getting up, he told Ron and Hermione he was going to ask Snape if he could have it back. Rather you than me, they said together. But Harry had an idea that Snape wouldn't refuse if there were other teachers listening. He made his way down to the staff room and knocked. There was no answer. He knocked again. Nothing. Perhaps Snape had left the book in there. It was worth a try. He pushed the door ajar and peered inside. An horrible scene met his eyes. Snape and Filch were inside, alone. Snape was holding his robes above his knee. One of his legs was bloody and mangled. Filch was handing Snape bandages. Blasted thing, Snape was saying. How are you supposed to keep your eyes on all three heads at once? Harry tried to shut the door quietly, but... Potter! Snape's face was twisted with fury as he dropped his robes quickly to hide his leg. Harry gulped. I just wondered if I could have my book back. Get out! Out! Harry left. Before Snape could take any more points away from Gryffindor, he sprinted back upstairs. Did you get it? Ron asked as Harry joined them. What's the matter? In a low whisper, Harry told them what he had seen. You know what this means? He finished breathlessly. He tried to get past the three-headed dog at Halloween. That's where he was going when we saw him. He's after what it's guarding. And I bet my broomstick he let that troll in to create a diversion. Hermione's eyes were wide. No, he wouldn't, she said. I know he's not very nice, but he wouldn't try and steal something Dumbledore was keeping safe. Honestly, Hermione, you think all the teachers are saints or something? Snapped Ron. I'm with Harry. I won't put anything past Snape. But what's he after? What's the dog guarding? Harry went to bed with his head buzzing at the same question. Neville was snoring loudly, but Harry couldn't sleep. He tried to empty his mind. He needed to sleep. He had to. He had his first Quidditch match in a few hours, but the expression on Snape's face when Harry had seen his leg wasn't easy to forget. The next morning dawned very bright and cold. The great hall was full of delicious smell of fried sausages and cheerful chatter with everyone looking forward to a good old Quidditch match. You got to eat some breakfast. I don't want anything. Just a bit of toast? Wheeled Hermione. I'm not hungry. Harry felt terrible. In an hour's time he'd been walking onto the pitch. Harry, you need your strength, said Seamus Finnegan. Seekers are always the ones that get nobbled by the other team. Thanks, Seamus, said Harry, watching Seamus pile ketchup on his sausages. Breathing is not allowed at school, 100 points Gryffindor. Bringing sparkling water to Dokami and meet Sheepy. You can bring sparkling water, I'm not going to touch it. You can bring it, but I'm not going near it. I'll go, yep, some good sparkling water you've got there, mate. And leave you to it. By 11 o'clock, the whole school seemed to be out in the stands around the Quidditch pitch. Many students had binoculars. The seats may be raised high in the air, but it was still difficult to see what's going on sometimes. Ron and Hermione joined Neville. Seamus and Dean, the West Ham fan, up in the top row. As a surprise for Harry, they had painted a large banner on one side of the sheets Scabbers had ruined. It said, Potter for President, and Dean, who was good at drawing, had done a large Gryffindor lion underneath. Then Hermione had performed a tricky little charm so that the paint flashed different colours. Meanwhile, in the changing rooms, Harry and the rest of the team were changing into their scarlet Quidditch robes. Slytherin would be playing in green. Bah. Wood cleared his throat for silence. Okay, men, he said. And women, said Chaser Angelina Johnson. And women, Wood agreed. This is it. The big one, said Fred Weasley. The one we've all been waiting for, said George. We know Oliver's speech by heart, Fred told Harry. We were in the team last year. Shut up, you two, said Wood. This is the best team Gryffindor's had in years. We're going to win. I know it. He glared at them all as if to say, or else. Right. It's time. Good luck, all of you. Harry followed Fred and George out of the changing room and hoping his knees weren't going to give way. Walked onto the pitch to loud cheers. Madam Hooch was refereeing. She stood in the middle of the pitch, waiting for the two teams, her broom in hand. Now, I want a nice, fair game, all of you, she said once they were all gathered around her. Harry noticed that she seemed to be speaking particularly to the Slytherin captain, Marcus Flint, a 5th year. Harry thought Flint looked as if he had some troll blood in him. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the fluttering banner high above, flashing Potter for president over the crowd. His heart skipped. He felt braver. Mount your brooms, please. Harry clambered onto his Nimbus 2000. I let a wee, darling. I don't apologise. It's fine. Not a problem. I am also trying to pay attention to chat as well, so sometimes I'm just pausing just for a moment just to see what's happening and then find a break in the story that I can just quickly respond or acknowledge anything that someone said. Too distracted yoinking first, you forgot sheep, Dewey. I was focused on first this time. Glad. But welcome in, darling. Welcome in. Madam Hooch gave a loud blast on her silver whistle. 15 brooms rose high into the air. They were off. And the quaffle is taken immediately by Angelina Johnson of Gryffindor. What an excellent chaser that girl is. And rather attractive, too. Jordan! Sorry, Professor. The Weasley's twins' friend, Lee Jordan, was doing some commentary of the match, closely watched by Professor McGonagall. And she's really belting along up there. A neat pass to Alicia Spinnet, a good friend of Oliver Wood's, last year only a reserve. Back to Johnson, and no, Slytherin have taken the quaffle. Slytherin captain Marcus Flint gains the quaffle, and off he goes. Flint flying like an eagle up there. He's going to... No! Stopped by an excellent move by Gryffindor keeper Wood, and Gryffindor take the quaffle. That's chaser Katie Bell out of Gryffindor. There, nice dive around Flint. Off up at the field and... Ouch, that must have hurt. Hit in the back of the head by a bludger. Quaffle taken by Slytherin. That's Adrian Posey, speeding towards the goalposts, but he's blocked by a second bludger. Sent his way by Fred, or George Weasley, can't tell them which. Nice play by Gryffindor. Beat her. Anyway, Johnson back in possession of the quaffle. A clear field ahead, and off she goes. She's really flying. Dodges a speeding bludger. The goalposts are ahead. Come on now, Angelina. Keeper Bletchley dives. Misses. Gryffindor score. Gryffindor cheers. Filled the cold air with howls and moans from the Slytherins. Budge up there, move along. Hagrid! Ron and Hermione squeezed together to give Hagrid enough room to join them. Been watching from my hut, said Hagrid, patting a large pair of binoculars around his neck. But it isn't the same as being in the crowd. No sign of the snitch yet, eh? Nope, said Ron. Harry hasn't had much to do yet. Kept out of trouble, though, that's something, said Hagrid, raising his binoculars and peering skyward at the speck that was Harry. Way up above them, Harry was gliding over the game, squinting about for some sign of the snitch. This was the part of his and Wood's game plan. Keep out of the way until you catch sight of the snitch, Wood had said. We don't want you attacked before you have to be. When Angelina had scored, Harry had done a couple of loop-the-loops to let out his feelings. Now he was back staring around for the snitch. Once he caught sight of the flash of gold, but it was just a reflection from one of the Weasleys' wristwatches. And once a bludger decided to come pelting his way. More like a cannonball than anything. But Harry dodged it, and Fred Weasley came chasing after it. All right there, Harry. He had time to yell, as he beat the bludger furiously towards Marcus Flint. Slytherin in possession, Lee Jordan was saying. Chaser Pusey ducks 2 bludgers. 2 Weasleys and Chaser Bell, and speeds towards the... Wait a moment, was that the snitch? A murmur ran through the crowd as Adrian Pusey dropped the quaffle, too busy looking over his shoulder at the flash of gold that had passed his left ear. Harry saw it. In a great rush of excitement, he dived downwards towards the streak of gold. Slytherin seeker Terence Higgs had seen it too. Neck and neck they hurtled towards the snitch. All the chasers seemed to have forgotten what they were supposed to be doing as they hung in the mid-air to watch. Harry was faster than Higgs. He could see a little round ball, wings fluttering, darting up ahead. He put on an extra spurt of speed. Wham! A roar of rage echoed through the Gryffindors below. Marcus Flint had blocked Harry on purpose, and Harry's broom span off course, Harry holding on for dear life. Foul! Screamed the Gryffindors. Madam Hooch spoke angrily to Flint, and then ordered a free shot at the goalposts for Gryffindor. But, in all of the confusion, of course, the Golden Snitch had disappeared from sight again. Down in the stands, Dean Thomas was yelling, "Send him off, ref! Red card!" "This isn't football, Dean," Ron reminded him. "Can't send people off in Quidditch. And what's a red card?" But Hagrid was on Dean's side. They ought to change the rules. Flint could have knocked Harry out of the air. Lee Jordan was finding it difficult not to take sides. So, after that obvious and disgusting bit of cheating, "Jordan!" growled Professor McGonagall. "I mean, after that open and revolting foul. Jordan, I'm warning you." All right. Flint nearly kills the Gryffindor Seeker, which could happen to anyone, I'm sure. So, a penalty to Gryffindor, taken by Spinnet, who puts it away, no trouble, and we continue play. Gryffindor still in possession. Also, the book makes no sense. Neither team wins unless the Seeker catches the Golden Snitch. So what's the point in hoops and smacking the balls through them? No. So as it said earlier, the Snitch provides the team 150 points. And that normally will secure a win. But if a team has more than a 150 point gap to the Golden Snitch and it's caught, the team with the most points still win. So the Golden Snitch just boosts you by 150 points, but doesn't guarantee a win. It just ends the game and gives that team 150 points. So the faster you catch the Snitch, the faster you've got the chance of guaranteeing a win. So that's why. Only chaos in here in chat. Wait, there's no time limit? Imagine the Seekers don't catch it for hours. Niels even said, the books even said the longest game was 3 months. Yeah. The longest Quidditch match was 3 months. I don't remember that. Don't remember you reading that unless I'm deaf. I know that was a rule in the movies. Yes, so it mentioned earlier on that catching the Snitch guarantees you 150 points and ends the game. But if a team has more than 150 points, more than the points granted to the team that caught the Snitch, they still have more points than that team. They still win. It's just the Snitch ends the game and grants 150 points, which in the movies and stuff they speed it up and just guarantee the win to the team that catches the Snitch. It was as Harry dodged another bludger, which went spinning dangerously past his head, that it happened. His broom gave a sudden, frightening lurch. For a split second he thought he was going to fall. He gripped the broom tightly with both his hands and knees. He'd never felt anything like that. It happened again. It was as if the broom was trying to buck him off. But Nimbus 2000s did not suddenly decide to buck their riders off. Harry tried to turn back towards the Gryffindor goalposts. He had half a mind to ask Wood to call time out, and then he realised his broom was completely out of his control. He couldn't turn it. He couldn't direct it at all. It was zigzagging through the air and every now and then making violent swishing movements, which almost unseated him. Lee was still commentating. Slytherin in possession. Flint with the quaffle. Passes Spinnet. Passes Bell. Hit hard in the face by a bludger. Hope it broke his nose. Only joking, Professor. Slytherin score. Oh no. The Slytherins were cheering. No one seemed to have noticed that Harry's broom was behaving strangely. It was carrying him slowly higher away from the game, jerking and twitching as it went. Dunno what Harry's thinks he's doing, Hagrid mumbled. He stared through his binoculars. If I didn't know any better, I'd say he's lost control of his broom. But he can't have. Suddenly, people were pointing up at Harry all over the stands. His broom had started to roll over and over, with him only just managing to hold on. Then the whole crowd gasped. Harry's broom had taken a wild jerk and Harry swung off it. He was now dangling from it, holding on with only one hand. Did something happen to it when Flint blocked him? Seamus whispered. Can't have, Hagrid said, his voice shaking. Can't nothing interfere with a broomstick except powerful dark magic. No kid could do that to a Nimbus 2000. At these words, Hermione seized Hagrid's binoculars, but instead of looking up at Harry, she started looking frantically at the crowd. What are you doing? Moaned Ron, grey-faced. I knew it, Hermione gasped. Snape, look! Ron grabbed his binoculars. Snape was in the middle of the stands opposite them. He had his eyes fixed on Harry and was muttering non-stop under his breath. He's doing something. Jinxing the broom, said Hermione. What should we do? Leave it to me. Before Ron could say another word, Hermione had disappeared. Ron turned the binoculars back onto Harry. His broom was vibrating so hard it was almost impossible for him to hang on much longer. The whole crowd were on their feet, watching, terrified as the Weasleys flew up to try and pull Harry safely onto their brooms, but it was no good. Every time they got near him, the broom would just jump higher. They dropped lower and circled beneath him, obviously hoping to catch him if he fell. Marcus Flint seized the quaffle and scored 5 times without anyone noticing. Come on, Hermione, Ron muttered desperately. Hermione had fought her way across the stands, where Snape stood, and was now racing along the row behind him. She didn't even stop to say sorry as she knocked Professor Quirrell headfirst into the row in front. Reaching Snape, she crouched down, pulled out her wand, and whispered a few well-chosen words. Bright blue flames shot out of her wand onto the hem of Snape's robes. It took perhaps 30 seconds for Snape to realise that he was on fire. A sudden yelp told her that she had done her job. Scooping the fire off him into a little jar in a pocket, she scrambled back along the row. Snape would never know what happened. It was enough. Up in the air, Harry suddenly was able to clamber back onto his broom. Neville, you can look, Ron said. Neville had been sobbing into Hagrid's jacket for the last 5 minutes. Harry was speeding towards the ground when the crowd saw him clap his hands to his mouth as though he was about to be sick. He hit the pitch on all fours, coughed, and something gold fell into his hands. I've got the snitch, he shouted, waving it above his head, and the game ended in complete confusion. He didn't catch it. He nearly swallowed it. Flint was still howling 20 minutes later, but it made no difference. Harry hadn't broken any rules, and Lee Jordan was still happily shouting at the result. Gryffindor had won by 170 points to 60. Harry heard none of this, though. He was being made a cup of strong black tea in Hagrid's hut, with Ron and Hermione. It was Snape, Ron was explaining. Hermione and I saw him. He was cursing your broomstick, muttering. He wouldn't take his eyes off you. Rubbish, said Hagrid, who hadn't heard a word of what had gone on next to him in the stands. Why would Snape do something like that? Harry, Ron and Hermione looked at each other, wondering what to tell him. Harry decided on the truth. I found out something about him, he told Hagrid. He tried to get past the 3-headed dog on Halloween. It bit him. I think he was trying to steal whatever it's guarding. Hagrid dropped the teapot. How do you know about Fluffy? He said. Fluffy? Yeah, he's mine. Bought him from a Greek chappie I met in the pub last year. I lent him to Dumbledore to guard the... Yes, Harry eagerly. Now, don't ask me any more, said Hagrid gruffly. That's top secret, that is. But Snape's trying to steal it. Rubbish, said Hagrid again. Snape's a Hogwarts teacher. He'd do nothing of the sort. So why did he just try and kill Harry? Cried Hermione. That afternoon's events certainly seemed to have changed her mind about Snape. I know a jinx when I see one, Hagrid. I've read all about them. You've got to keep eye contact, and Snape wasn't blinking at all. I saw him. I'm telling you, you're wrong, said Hagrid hotly. I don't know why Harry's broom acted like that, but Snape wouldn't try and kill a student. Now listen to me, all 3 of you. You're meddling in things that don't concern you. It's dangerous. You forget that dog, and you forget what it's guarding. That's between Professor Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel. Aha, said Harry. So there is someone called Nicholas Flamel involved, isn't there? Hagrid looked furious with himself. Get wrecked, Snape. Yeah, Fluffy. Yeah, cute little Fluffy. Chapter 12. The Mirror of Erised. Christmas was coming. One morning in mid-December, Hogwarts woke to find itself covered in several feet of snow. The lake froze solid, and the Weasley twins were punished for bewitching several snowballs that they followed Quirrell around, bouncing off the back of his turban. The few owls that managed to battle their way through the stormy skies to deliver post had to be nursed back to health by Hagrid before they could fly off again. No one could wait for the holidays to start. While the Gryffindor common room and the Great Hall had roaring fires, the drafty corridors had become icy and bitter wind rattled the windows in the classrooms. Wind rattled the windows in the classrooms. Worst of all were Professor Snape's classes down in the dungeons, where their breath rose in a mist before them, and they kept as close as possible to their hot cauldrons. "I do feel so sorry," said Draco Malfoy. "One potions class, but all those people who have had to stay at Hogwarts for Christmas because they're not wanted at home." He was looking over at Harry as he spoke. Crabbe and Goyle chuckled. Harry, who was measuring out his powdered spine of lionfish, ignored them. Harry had been even more unpleasant than usual since the Quidditch match. Disgusted that Slytherin had lost, he had to try and get everyone laughing at how a wide-mouthed tree frog would be replacing Harry as a Seeker next year. Then he realised that nobody found this funny, because they were all so impressed at the way Harry managed to stay on his bucking broomstick. So, Malfoy, jealous and angry, had gone back to taunting Harry about having no proper family. It was true that Harry wasn't going back to Privet Drive for Christmas. Professor McGonagall had come round the week before, making a list of students who would be staying for the holidays, and Harry had signed up at once. He didn't feel sorry for himself at all. This would probably be the best Christmas he'd ever have. Ron and his brothers were staying too, because Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were going to Romania to visit Charlie. When they left the dungeons at the end of potions, they found a large fir tree blocking the corridor ahead. Two enormous feet sticking out at the bottom, and a loud, puffing sound told them that Hagrid was behind it. "Hi, Hagrid. Want any help?" Ron asked, sticking his head through the branches. "Nah, I'm all right, thanks, Ron." "Would you mind moving out the way?" came Malfoy's cold drawl from behind them. "Are you trying to earn some extra money, Weasley? Hoping to be gamekeeper yourself when you leave Hogwarts, I suppose? That hut of Hagrid's must seem like a palace compared to what your family's used to." Ron dived at Malfoy just as Snape came up the stairs. "Weasley!" Ron let go of the front of Malfoy's robes. "He was provoked, Professor Snape," said Hagrid, sticking his huge hairy face out from behind the tree. "Malfoy was insulting his family." "Be that as it may, fighting is against Hogwarts rules, Hagrid," said Snape silkily. 5 points from Gryffindor, Weasley, and be grateful it isn't more. Move along, all of you." "I'll get him," said Ron, grinding his teeth at Malfoy's back. Oh, wait, sorry, I missed a bit. Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle pushed roughly past the three, scattering needles everywhere and smirking. "I'll get him," said Ron, grinding his teeth at Malfoy's back. "One of these days, I'll get him." "I hate them both," said Harry. "Malfoy and Snape." "Come on, cheer up, it's nearly Christmas," said Hagrid. "Tell you what, come with me and see the Great Hall. Looks a treat." So Harry, Ron and Hermione followed Hagrid and his tree off to the Great Hall, where Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick were busy with Christmas decorations. "Ah, Hagrid, the last tree. Put it in the far corner, would you?" The hall looked spectacular. Festoons of holly and mistletoe hung around the walls, and no fewer than 12 towering Christmas trees stood around the room, some sparkling with tiny icicles, some glittering with hundreds of candles. "How many days have you got left until your holidays?" Hagrid asked. "Just one," said Hermione. "And that reminds me, Harry, Ron, we've got half an hour before lunch. We should be in the library." "Oh yeah, you're right," said Ron, tearing his eyes away from Professor Flitwick, who had golden bubbles blossoming out of his wand and was trailing them over the branches of the new tree. "The library?" said Hagrid, following them out of the hall. "Just before the holidays? Bit keen, aren't you?" "Oh, we're not working," Harry told him brightly. "Ever since you mentioned Nicholas Flamel, we've been trying to find out who he is." "You what?" Hagrid looked shocked. "Listen here, I've told you. Drop it. It's nothing. To you, what that dog's garden." "We just want to know who Nicholas Flamel is, that's all," said Hermione. Unless you'd like to tell us, save us the trouble," Harry added. "We must have been through 100 books already and we can't find him anywhere. Just give us a hint. I know I've read his name somewhere." "I'm not saying nothing," said Hagrid flatly. "Just have to find out for yourselves, then," said Ron, and left Hagrid looking disgruntled and hurried off to the library. They had indeed been searching books for Flamel's name ever since Hagrid let slip, because how else were they going to find out what Snape was trying to steal? The trouble was, it was very hard to know where to begin, not knowing what Flamel might have done to get himself into a book. He wasn't in great wizards of the 20th century, or notable magical names of our time. He was missing, too, from important modern wizard discoveries, and a study of recent developments in wizardry. And then, of course, there was the sheer size of the library. Tens of thousands of books, thousands of shelves, hundreds of narrow rows. Hermione took out a list of subjects and titles that she had decided to search while Ron strode off down a row of books and started pulling them off the shelves at random. Harry wandered over to the restricted section. He had been wondering for a while if Flamel wasn't somewhere in there. Unfortunately, he needed a specially signed note from one of the teachers to look in any of the restricted books, and he knew he'd never get one. These were the books containing powerful dark magic, never taught at Hogwarts, and only read by older students studying advanced defense against the dark arts. "What are you looking for, boy?" "Nothing," said Harry. Madam Prince the librarian brandished a feather duster at him. "You'd better get out then. Go on, out." Wishing he'd been a bit quicker at thinking up some story, Harry left the library. He, Ron and Hermione had already agreed they'd better not ask Madam Prince about where they could find about Nicholas Flamel. They were sure she'd be able to tell them, but they couldn't risk Snape hearing what they were up to. Harry waited outside in the corridor to see if the other two had found anything, but he wasn't very hopeful. They had been looking for over a fortnight, after all, but as they only had odd movements between lessons, it wasn't surprising they'd found nothing. What they really needed was a nice long search without Madam Pince breathing down their necks. 5 minutes later, Ron and Hermione joined him, shaking their heads. They went off to lunch. "You will keep looking while I'm away, won't you?" said Hermione. "And send me an owl if you find anything." "And you can ask your parents if they know who Flamel is," said Ron. It'd be safe to ask them. Very safe, as they're both dentists," said Hermione. Once the holidays had started, Ron and Harry are having too good of a time to think much about Flamel. They had the dormitory to themselves, and the common room was far emptier than usual, so they were able to get good armchairs by the fire. They sat by the hour, eating anything they could, spear a toasting fork, bread, crumpets, marshmallows, and plotting ways of getting Malfoy expelled, which were fun to talk about even if they wouldn't work. Ron also started teaching Harry wizard chess. This was exactly like Muggle chess, except the figures were alive, which made it a lot like directing troops in battle. Ron's set was very old and battered, like everything else he owned. It had once belonged to someone else in his family, in this case, his grandfather. However, old chessmen weren't a drawback at all. Ron knew them so well, he never had trouble getting them to do what he wanted. Harry played with chessman Seamus Finnegan had lent him, and they didn't trust him at all. He wasn't a very good player, yet, and they kept shouting different bits of advice at him, which was confusing. "Don't send me there. Can't you see his knight? Send him. We can afford to lose him." On Christmas Eve, Harry went to bed looking forward to the next day for the food and the fun, but not expecting any presents at all. When he woke early next morning, however, the first thing he saw was a small pile of packages at the foot of his bed. "Happy Christmas," said Ron, sleepily as Harry scrambled out of bed and pulled on his dressing gown. "You too," said Harry. "Will you look at this? I've got some presents." "What did you expect? Turnips?" said Ron, turning to his own pile, which was a lot bigger than Harry's. Harry picked up the top parcel. It was wrapped in a thick brown paper and scrawled across it was, "To Harry, from Hagrid." Inside was a roughly cut wooden flute. Hagrid had obviously whittled it down himself. Harry blew it. It sounded a bit like an owl. A second, very small parcel contained a note. "We received your message and enclose your Christmas present. From Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia." Sellotaped to the note was a 50-pence piece. "That's friendly," said Harry. Ron was fascinated by the 50-pence. "Weird," he said. "What a shape. This is money?" You can keep it, said Harry, laughing at how pleased Ron was. Hagrid and my aunt and uncle. So who sent these? I think I know who's that one's from, said Ron, going a bit pink and pointing to a very lumpy parcel. My mum. I told her you didn't expect any presents, and oh no, he groaned. She's made you a Weasley jumper. Harry had torn open the parcel to find a thick, hand-knitted sweater in emerald green and a large box of homemade fudge. Every year she makes us a jumper, said Ron, unwrapping his own, and mine's always maroon. That's really nice of her, said Harry, trying the fudge, which was very tasty. His next present also contained sweets, a large box of chocolate frogs from Hermione. Ho ho ho, Merry Christmas, you little shits. This left only one parcel. Harry picked it up and felt it. It was very light. He unwrapped it. Something fluid and silvery grey went slithering to the floor. Where it lay in gleaming folds, Ron gasped. I've heard of those, he said in a hushed voice, dropping the box of ever-flavoured beans he'd got from Hermione. If that's what I think it is, they're really rare and really valuable. What is it? Harry picked the shining, slivery cloth off the floor. It was strange to the touch, like water woven into material. It's an invisibility cloak, said Ron. A look of awe in his face. I'm sure it is. Try it on. Harry threw the cloak around his shoulders, and Ron gave a yell. It is! Look down! Harry looked down at his feet, but they had gone. He dashed to the mirror. Sure enough, his reflection looked back at him, just his head suspended in midair, his body completely invisible. He pulled the cloak over his head, and his reflection vanished completely. There's a note, said Ron suddenly. A note fell out of it. Harry pulled off the cloak and seized the letter. Written in narrow, loopy writing, he had never seen it before, were the following words. Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well. A very Merry Christmas to you. There was no signature. Harry stared at the note. Ron was admiring the cloak. I'd give anything for one of those, he said. Anything. What's the matter? Nothing, said Harry. He felt very strange. Who had sent the cloak? Had it really once belonged to his father? Before you could say or think anything, the dormitory door was flung open and Fred and George Weasley bounded in. Harry stuffed the cloak quickly out of sight. He didn't feel like sharing it with anyone else yet. Merry Christmas! Hey, look! Harry's got a Weasley jumper too! Fred and George were wearing blue jumpers, one with a large yellow F on it and the other with a large yellow G. Harry's is better than ours, though, said Fred, holding up Harry's jumper. She obviously makes more of an effort if you're not family. Why aren't you wearing yours, Ron? George demanded. Come on, get it on. They're lovely and warm. I hate maroon, Ron moaned half-heartedly as he pulled it over his head. You haven't got a letter on yours, George observed. I suppose she thinks you don't forget your name. But we're not stupid. We know you're called Gred and Forge. What's all this noise? Percy Weasley stuck his head through the door, looking disapproving. He had clearly come halfway through unwrapping his presents as he, too, carried a lumpy jumper over his arm, which Fred seized. P for prefect. Get it on, Percy, come on. We're all wearing ours, even Harry's got one. I don't want, said Percy thickly, as the twins forced this jumper over his head, knocking his glasses askew. And you're not sitting with the prefects today either, said George. Christmas is a time for family. They frog-marched Percy from the room, his arms pinned to his sides by his jumper. Harry had never in all of his life had such a Christmas dinner. 100 fat roast turkeys, mountains of roast and boiled potatoes, platters of fat chipotles, tureens of buttered peas, silver boats of thick, rich gravy and cranberry sauce, and stacks of wizard crackers every few feet along the table. These fantastic crackers were nothing like the feeble muggle ones the Dursleys usually brought. With their little plastic toys and their flimsy paper hats, Harry pulled a wizard cracker with Fred, and it didn't just bang, it went off with a blast like a cannon and engulfed them in a cloud of blue smoke, while from the inside exploded a rear admiral's hat and several live white mice. Up on the table, Dumbledore had swapped his pointy wizard hat for a flowered bonnet and was chuckling merrily at the joke Professor Flitwick has just read him. Flaming Christmas pudding followed the turkey. Percy nearly broke his teeth on a silver sickle embedded in his slice. Harry watched Hagrid getting redder and redder in the face as he called for more wine, finally kissing Professor McGonagall on the cheek, who, to Harry's amazement, giggled and blushed, her top hat lopsided. When Harry finally left the table, he was laden down with a stack of things out of the crackers, including a pack of non-explodable, luminous balloons, a grow-your-own-warts kit, and his own new wizard chess set. The white mice had disappeared, and Harry had a nasty feeling they were going to end up in Mrs. Norris's Christmas dinner. Harry and the Weasleys spent a happy afternoon in a furious snowball fight in the grounds. Then, cold, wet, and gasping for breath, they returned to the fire in the Gryffindor common room, where Harry broke in his new chess set by losing spectacularly to Ron. He suspected he wouldn't have lost so badly if Percy didn't try to help him so much. After a tea of turkey sandwiches, crumpets, trifle, and Christmas cake, everyone felt too full and sleepy to do much more before bed, except sit and watch Percy chase Fred and George all over Gryffindor Tower because they'd stolen his prefect badge. It had been Harry's best Christmas day ever, yet something had been nagging at the back of his mind all day. Not until he climbed into bed was he free to think about it. The invisibility cloak, and whoever had sent it. Ron, full of turkey and cake, and with nothing mysterious to bother him, fell asleep almost as soon as he'd drawn the curtains of his four-poster. Harry leant over the side of his own bed and pulled the cloak out from under it. His father's. This had been his father's. He let the material flow over his hands, smoother than silk, light as air. Use it well, the note had said. He had to try it now. He slipped out of bed and wrapped the cloak around himself. Looking down at his legs, he saw only moonlight and shadows. It was a very funny feeling. Use it well. Suddenly, Harry felt wide awake. The whole of Hogwarts was open to him in this cloak. Excitement flooded through him as he stood there in the dark and silence. He could go anywhere. Anywhere in this. Anywhere. And Filch would never know. Ron grunted in his sleep. Should Harry wake him? Something held him back. His father's cloak. He felt that this time, first time, he wanted to use it alone. Barbecue and shoot? No. Platters of sheep? Barbecue? No. Turkeys. Turkeys. You menaces. It was platters of turkeys, roast potatoes, and boiled potatoes. No barbecuing sheep. You menaces. I heard sheep. No, you didn't. He crept out of the dormitory, down the stairs, across the common room, and climbed through the portrait hole. Who's there? Squawked the fat lady. Harry said nothing. He walked quickly down the corridor. Where should he go? He stopped, his heart racing, and thought. And then it came to him. The restricted section in the library. He'd been able to read as long as he liked, and as long as it took to find out who Flamel was. He set off, drawing the invisibility cloak tight around him as he walked. The library was pitch black and very eerie. Harry lit a lamp to see his way along the rows of books. The lamp looked as if it was floating along in midair, and even though Harry could feel his arm supporting it, the sight gave him the creeps. The restricted section was right at the back of the library. Stepping carefully over the rope, which separated these books from the rest of the library, he held up his lamp to read the titles. They didn't tell him much. Their peeling, faded gold letters, spelling words in languages Harry couldn't understand. Some had no title at all. One book had a dark stain on it that looked horribly like blood. The hairs on the back of Harry's neck prickled. Maybe he was imagining it, maybe not. But he thought a faint whispering was coming from one of the books, as though it knew someone was there who shouldn't be. Fun fact, Nicholas Flamel was a real person. That doesn't surprise me. Yeah. J.K. Rowling, she took a lot of inspiration from real people, including Harry. Well, there was people's gravestones with the surname Potter, and so she made the character Harry Potter based on them. I've seen their gravestones. He had to start somewhere. Setting the lamp down carefully on the floor, he looked along the bottom shelf for an interesting-looking book. A large black and silver volume caught his eye. He pulled it out with difficulty because it was very heavy, and balancing it on his knee, let it fall open. A piercing, blood-curdling shriek split the silence. The book was screaming. Harry snapped it shut, but the shriek went on and on, one high, unbroken, ear-splitting note. He stumbled backwards, knocking over his lamp, which went out at once. Panicking, he heard footsteps coming down from the corridor outside. Stuffing the shrieking book back on the shelf, he ran for it. He passed Filch almost in the doorway, Filch's pale, wild eyes looking straight through him, and Harry slipped under Filch's outstretched arm and streaked off up the corridor, the book's shrieks still ringing in his ears. So magic is real? Yeah. He came to a sudden halt in the front of a tall suit of armour. He had been so busy getting away from the library, he hadn't paid attention to where he was going. Perhaps because it was dark, he didn't recognise where he was at all. There was a suit of armour near the kitchens, he knew, but he must be 5 floors above there. You asked me to come directly to you, Professor. If anyone was wandering around at night and somebody's been in the library, restricted section. Harry felt the blood drain out from his face. Wherever he was, Filch must know a shortcut, because his soft, greasy voice was getting nearer, and to his horror, it was Snape who replied. The restricted section? Well, they can't be that far. We'll catch them. Harry stood rooted to the spot as Filch and Snape came around the corner ahead. They couldn't see him, of course, but it was a narrow corridor, and they came much nearer, they'd knock right into him. The cloak didn't stop him from being solid. He backed away as quietly as he could. The door stood ajar to his left. It was his only hope. He squeezed through it, holding his breath, trying not to move it, and to his relief, he managed to get inside the room without them noticing anything. They walked straight past, and Harry leaned against the wall, breathing deeply, listening to their footsteps dying away. That had been close. Very close. It was a few seconds before he noticed anything about the room that he had hidden in. It looked like a disused classroom. The dark shapes of desks and chairs were piled up against the walls, and there was an upturned waste paper basket. But, propped against the wall facing him was something that didn't look as if it belonged there. Something that looked as if someone had just put it there to keep it out of the way. It was a magnificent mirror, as high as the ceiling with an ornate gold frame, standing on 2 clawed feet. There was an inscription carved around the top. Irised stra eru oit ub kafru oit on wassi. His panic fading now that there was no sound of Filch and Snape. Harry moved nearer to the mirror, wanting to look at himself, but see no reflection again. He stepped in front of it. He had to clap his hands to his mouth to stop himself screaming. He whirled around. His heart was pounding far more furiously than when the book had screamed, for he had not seen only himself in the mirror, but a whole crowd of people standing right behind him. But the room was empty. Breathing very fast, he turned slowly back to the mirror. There he was, reflected in it, white and scared looking. And there, reflected behind him, were at least 10 others. Harry looked over his shoulder, but still no one was there. Or were they all invisible too? Was he in fact in a room full of invisible people, and this mirror's trick was that they reflected them, invisible or not? He looked into the mirror again. A woman standing right behind his reflection was smiling at him and waving. He reached out to her hand and felt the air behind him. If she was really there, he'd have touched her. Their reflections were so close together, but he felt only air. She and the others existed only in the mirror. She was a very pretty woman. She had dark red hair and her eyes just like mine, Harry thought, edging a little closer to the glass. Bright green, exactly the same shape, but then he noticed that she was crying, smiling, but crying at the same time. The tall, thin black-haired man standing next to her, put his arm around her. He wore glasses and his hair was very untidy. It was stuck up at the back, just like Harry's did. Harry was so close to the mirror now that his nose was nearly touching of his reflection. "Mum?" he whispered. "Dad?" They just looked at him, smiling. And slowly, Harry looked into the faces of the other people in the mirror and saw pairs of green eyes like his, other noses like his, even an old man who looked though as if he had Harry's knobbly knees. Harry was looking at his family for the first time in his life. The Potters smiled and waved at Harry, and he stared hungrily back at them. His hands pressed flat against the glass, as though he was hoping to fall right through it and reach them. He had a powerful kind of ache inside him, half joy, half terrible sadness. How long he stood there he didn't know. The reflections did not fade, and he looked and looked until a distant noise brought him back to his senses. He couldn't stay here. He had to find his way back to bed. He tore his eyes away from the mother's face, whispered, "I'll come back," and hurried from the room. "You could have woken me up," said Ron, crossly. "You can come tonight. I'm going back. I want to show you the mirror." "I'd like to see your mum and dad," Ron said eagerly. "And I want to see all your family, all the Weasleys. You'll be able to show me all your other brothers and everyone. You can see them any time, any old time," said Ron. "Just come round my house this summer. Anyway, maybe it only shows dead people. Shame about not finding Flamel, though. Have some bacon or something. Why aren't you eating anything?" Harry couldn't eat. He had seen his parents and would be seeing them again tonight. He had almost forgotten about Flamel. It didn't seem very important anymore. Who cared what the three-headed dog was guarding? What did matter is if Snape stole it? What did it matter if Snape stole it, really? "Are you all right?" said Ron. "You look odd." What Harry feared the most was that he might not be able to find the mirror room again. With Ron covered in the cloak too, they walked much more slowly next night. They tried retracing Harry's route from the library, wandering around the dark passages for nearly an hour. "I'm freezing," said Ron. "Let's forget it and go back." "No," Harry hissed. "I know it's here somewhere." They passed the ghost of a tall witch gliding in the opposite direction, but they saw no one else. Just as Ron started moaning that his feet were dead with cold, Harry spotted the suit of armor. "It's here, just here, yes." They pushed the door open. Harry dropped the cloak from around his shoulders and ran to the mirror. There they were. His mother and father beamed at the sight of him. "See?" Harry whispered. "I can't see anything. Look at them all. There's loads of them. I can only see you. Look at it properly. Go on, stand where I am." Harry stepped aside, but with Ron in front of the mirror, he couldn't see his family anymore. Just Ron in his paisley pajamas. Ron, though, was staring transfixed at his image. "Look at me," he said. "Can you see all your family standing around you?" "No. I'm alone, but I'm different. I look older. And I'm head boy." "What?" "I am. I'm wearing the badge like Bill used to. And I'm holding the house cup. And the Quidditch cup. I'm Quidditch captain too." Ron tore his eyes away from the splendid sight to look excitedly at Harry. "Do you think this mirror shows the future?" "How can it? All my family are dead. Let me have another look." "You had it to yourself all last night. Give me a bit more time." "You're only holding the Quidditch cup. What's interesting about that? I want to see my parents." "Don't push me." A sudden noise outside the corridor put an end to their discussion. They hadn't realized how loudly they had been talking. "Quick!" Ron threw the cloak back over them as the luminous eyes of Mrs. Norris came round the door. Ron and Harry stood quite still, both thinking the same thing. Did the cloak work on cats? After what seemed an age, she turned and left. The mirror of copium. Yeah. "This isn't safe. She might have gone for Filch. I bet she heard us. Come on." And Ron pulled Harry out of the room. The snow still hadn't melted next morning. "Want to play chess, Harry?" said Ron. "No." "Why don't we go down and visit Hagrid?" "No. You go." "I know what you're thinking about, Harry. That mirror. Don't go back tonight." "Why not?" I don't know, I've just got a bad feeling about it. And anyway, you've had too many close shaves already. Filch, Snape, and Mrs. Norris are wandering around too. What if they... So what if they can't see you? What if they walk into you? What if you knock something over? You sound like Hermione. I'm serious, Harry. Don't go. But Harry only had one thought in his head, which was to get back in front of the mirror, and Ron wasn't going to stop him. That third night, he found his way more quickly than before. He's walking so fast he knew he was making more noise than he was wise. But he didn't meet anyone. And there were his mother and father smiling at him again, and one of his grandfathers nodding happily. Harry sank down to sit on the floor in front of the mirror. There was nothing to stop him staying there all night with his family. Nothing at all. Except... So, back again, Harry. Harry felt as though his insides had turned into ice. My, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome in. Hi. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Harry had felt as though his insides had turned to ice. He looked behind him. Sitting on one of the desks by the wall was none other than Albus Dumbledore. Harry must have walked straight past him, so desperate to get to the mirror he hadn't noticed him. I didn't see you, sir. Strange how short-sighted being invisible can make you, said Dumbledore, and Harry was relieved to see that he was smiling. So, said Dumbledore, slipping off his desk to sit on the floor with Harry. You, like hundreds before you, have discovered the delights of the mirror Erised. I didn't know what it was called, sir. But I didn't expect... I expected you've realised by now what it does. It shows me my family. And it showed your friend Ron himself as head boy. How did you know... I don't need a cloak to become invisible, said Dumbledore gently. Now, can you think what the Mirror of Erised shows us all? Harry shook his head. Let me explain. The happiest man on earth would be able to use the Mirror of Erised like a normal mirror. That is, he would look into it and see himself exactly as he is. Does that help? Harry thought. Then he said slowly, It shows us what we want. Whatever we want. Yes and no, said Dumbledore quietly. It shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts. You, who have never known your family, see them standing around you. Ronald Weasley, who has always been overshadowed by his brothers, sees himself standing alone, the best of all of them. However, this mirror will give us neither knowledge nor truth. Men have wasted away before it, entranced by what they've seen, or been driven mad, not knowing if what it shows is real or even possible. The mirror will be moved to a new home tomorrow, Harry, and I ask that you do not go looking for it again. If you ever do run across it, you will now be prepared. It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. Remember that. Now, why don't you put your admiral cloak back on and get off to bed? Harry stood up. Sir, Professor Dumbledore, can I ask you something? Obviously, you've just done so. Dumbledore smiled. You may ask me one more thing, however. What do you see when you look in the mirror? I see myself holding a pair of thick, woolen socks. Harry stared. One can never have enough socks, said Dumbledore. Another Christmas has come and gone, and I didn't get a single pair. People will insist on giving me books. It was only when he was back in bed that it struck Harry that Dumbledore might not have been quite truthful. But then, he thought, as he shoved Scabbers off his pillow, it had been quite a personal question. I swear Dumbledore has surveillance cameras all over Hogwarts. Dumbledore was an extremely powerful wizard. And Dumbledore was always keeping tabs on Harry. That was his job. His sole job was to keep an eye on Harry. And so he would always know where Harry was. Man's smart. Also, a little creepy, but man's smart. Hello, Callas. Welcome in. I hope you're doing well. Chapter 13. Nicholas Flamel. Dumbledore had convinced Harry not to go looking for the Mirror of Erised again, and for the rest of Christmas holidays, the invisibility cloak stayed folded at the bottom of his trunk. Harry wished he could forget what he had seen in the mirror as easily, but he couldn't. He started having nightmares. Over and over again, he dreamed about his parents disappearing in a flash of green light while a high voice cackled with laughter. You see, Dumbledore was right. That mirror could drive you mad, said Ron, when Harry told him about these dreams. Hermione, who came back the day before term started, took a different view of things. She was torn between horror at the idea of Harry being out of bed, roaming the school 3 nights in a row, if Filch had caught you, and disappointment that he hadn't at least found out who Nicholas Flamel was. They had almost given up hope for ever finding Flamel in a library book, even though Harry was still sure he'd read the name somewhere. Once term had started, they were back to skimming through books for 10 minutes during their breaks. Harry had even less time than the other two because Quidditch practice has started again. Wood was working the team harder than ever. Even the endless rain that had replaced the snow couldn't dampen his spirits. The Weasleys complained to Wood that he was becoming a fanatic, but Harry was on Wood's side. If they won their next match against Hufflepuff, they would overtake Slytherin in the House Championship for the first time in 7 years. Quite apart from wanting to win, Harry found that he had fewer nightmares when he was tired out after training. Then, during one particular wet and muddy practice session, Wood gave the team a bit of bad news. He'd just got very angry with the Weasleys, who kept dive-bombing each other and pretending to fall off their brooms. "Will you stop messing around?" he yelled. "That's exactly the sort of thing that'll lose us the match. Snape's refereeing this one, and he'll be looking for any excuse to knock off points of Gryffindor." George Weasley really did fall off his broom at these words. "Snape's refereeing?" he spluttered, through the mouthful of mud. When's he ever refereed a Quidditch match? He's not going to be fair if we might overtake Slytherin. The rest of the team landed next to George to complain too. "It's not my fault," said Wood. "We've just got to make sure we play a clean game so Snape hasn't got an excuse to pick on us." Which was all very well, thought Harry, but he had another reason for not wanting Snape near him while he was playing Quidditch. The rest of the team hung back to talk to each other as usual at the end of practice, but Harry headed straight back to the Gryffindor common room, where he found Ron and Hermione playing chess. Chess was the only thing Hermione ever lost at, something Harry and Ron thought was very good for her. "Don't talk to me for a moment," said Ron, when Harry sat down next to him. "I need to concentrate." He caught sight of Harry's face. "What's the matter with you? You look terrible." Speaking quietly so no one else would hear, Harry told the other two about Snape's sudden sinister desire to be a Quidditch referee. "Don't play," said Hermione at once. "Say you're ill," said Ron. "Pretend to break your leg," Hermione suggested. "Really break your leg," said Ron. "I can't," said Harry. "There isn't a reserve seeker. If I back out, Gryffindor can't play at all." At that moment, Neville toppled into the common room. He had managed to climb through the portrait hole, was anyone's guess, because his legs had been stuck together with what they recognised at once to be a leg locker curse. He must have had to bunny hop all the way up the Gryffindor tower. Everyone fell about laughing except Hermione, who leapt up and performed the counter curse. Neville's legs sprang apart, and he got to his feet, trembling. "What happened?" Hermione asked him, leading him over to sit with Harry and Ron. "Malfoy," said Neville shakily. "I met him outside the library. He said he's been looking for someone to practice that on." "Go to Professor McGonagall," Hermione urged Neville. "Report him." Neville shook his head. "I don't want more trouble," he mumbled. "You've got to stand up to him, Neville," said Ron. "He's used to walking all over people, but that's no reason to lie down in front of him and make it easier." "There's no need to tell me I'm not brave enough to be in Gryffindor. Malfoy's already done that," Neville choked. Harry felt in his pocket of his robes and pulled out a chocolate frog, the very last one from the box Hermione had given him for Christmas. He gave it to Neville, who looked as though he might cry. "You're worth 12 of Malfoy," Harry said. "The Sorting Hat chose you for Gryffindor, didn't he? And where's Malfoy? In stinking Slytherin." Neville's lips twitched with a weak smile as he unwrapped the frog. Thanks, Harry. I think I'll go to bed. Do you want the card? You collect them, don't you? As Neville walked away, Harry looked at the famous wizard card. Dumbledore again. He said. He was the first one I ever... He gasped. He stared at the back of the card, and then he looked up at Ron and Hermione. I found him, he whispered. I found Flamel. I told you I'd read the name somewhere before. I read it on the train coming here. Listen to this. Professor Dumbledore is particularly famous for defeating the dark wizard Grindelwald in 1945, for the discovery of 12 uses of dragon's blood, and his work on alchemy with his partner Nicholas Flamel. Hermione jumped to her feet. She hadn't looked so excited since they got back the marks from the very first piece of homework. Stay there, she said, and she sprinted up the stairs to the girls' dormitories. Harry and Ron barely had the time to exchange mystified looks before she came dashing back, an enormous old book in her arms. I never thought to look in here, she whispered excitedly. I got this out the library weeks ago for a bit of light reading. Light? Said Ron. But Hermione told him to be quiet until she looked something up, and she started flicking frantically through the pages, muttering to herself. At last she found what she was looking for. I knew it! I knew it! Are we allowed to speak yet? Said Ron grumpily, Hermione ignoring him. Nicholas Flamel, she whispered dramatically, is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone. This didn't have quite the effect she expected. The what? Said Harry and Ron. Oh, honestly, don't you two read? Look, read that there. She pushed the book towards them, and Harry and Ron read. Like reading, fucking nerd. Look, Hermione is very much a bookworm. Okay? She's a bookworm, leave her be. She's having fun. Okay, so she pushed the book towards them, and Harry and Ron read. The ancient study of alchemy is concerned with making the Philosopher's Stone, a legendary substance with astonishing powers. The stone will transform any metal into pure gold. It also produces the elixir of life, which will make the drinker immortal. There have been many reports of the Philosopher's Stone over the centuries, but the only stone currently in existence belongs to Mr. Nicholas Flamel, the noted alchemist and opera lover, Mr. Flamel, who celebrated his 665th birthday last year, enjoys a quiet life in Devon with his wife, Pernell, 658. See, said Hermione, when Harry and Ron had finished, the dog must be guarding Flamel's Philosopher's Stone. I bet he's asked Dumbledore to keep it safe for him, because they're friends, and he knew someone was after it. That's why he wanted the stone moved out of Gringotts. A stone that makes gold and stops you ever dying, said Harry. No wonder Snape's after it. Anyone would want that. And no wonder we couldn't find Flamel in the study of recent developments in wizardry, said Ron. He's not exactly recent if he's 665, is he? The next morning, in the Defense Against the Dark Arts, while copying down different ways of treating werewolf bites, Harry and Ron were still discussing what they'd do with the Philosopher's Stone if they had one. It wasn't until Ron said he was busy buying his Quidditch team that Harry remembered about Snape and the coming match. I'm going to play, he told Ron and Hermione. If I don't, all the Slytherins will think I'm too scared to face Snape. I'll show them. It'll really wipe the smiles off their faces if we win. Just as long as we're not wiping you off the pitch, said Hermione. As the match drew nearer, however, Harry became more and more nervous. Whatever he told Ron and Hermione, the rest of the teams weren't too calm either. The idea of overtaking Slytherin in the House Championship was wonderful. No one had ever done it in nearly 7 years. But would they be allowed to with such a biased referee? Harry didn't know whether he was imagining it or not, but he seemed to keep running into Snape wherever he went. At times he even wondered whether Snape was following him, trying to catch him on his own. Potions lessons were turning into a sort of weekly torture. Snape was so horrible to Harry. Could Snape possibly know they've found out about the Philosopher's Stone? Harry didn't see how he could. Yet, he sometimes had a horrible feeling that Snape could read minds. Harry knew, when they wished him good luck outside the changing rooms next afternoon, that Ron and Hermione were wondering whether they'd see him alive again. This wasn't what you'd call comforting. Harry hardly heard a word of Wood's pep talk as he pulled on his Quidditch robes and picked up his Nimbus 2000. Ron and Hermione, who, meanwhile, had found a place in the stands next to Neville. who couldn't understand why they looked so grim and worried, and why they'd both brought their wands to the match. Little did Harry know that Ron and Hermione had been secretly practicing the leg locker curse. They'd got the idea from Malfoy using it on Neville, and were ready to use it on Snape if he showed any sign of wanting to hurt Harry. Now don't forget, it's locomotor mortis, Hermione muttered, as Ron slipped his wand up his sleeve. I know, Ron snapped. Don't nag. Back in the changing room, Wood had taken Harry aside. Don't want to pressure you, Potter, but if we need an early capture of the snitch, it's now. Finish the game before Snape can favour Hufflepuff too much. The whole school's out there, said Fred Weasley, peering out at the door. Even, blimey, Dumbledore's come to watch. Harry's heart did a somersault. Dumbledore, he said, dashing out the door to make sure. Fred was right. There was no mistaking that silver beard. Harry could have laughed out loud with relief. He was safe. There was simply no way Snape would dare to try and hurt him if Dumbledore was watching. Perhaps that was why Snape was looking so angry as the teams marched onto the pitch, something that Ron noticed too. I've never seen Snape look so mean, he told Hermione. Look, they're off. Ouch. Someone had poked Ron in the back of the head. It was Malfoy. Oh, sorry, Weasley. Didn't see you there. Malfoy grinned broadly at Crabbe and Goyle. Wonder how long Potter's going to stay on his broom this time. Anyone want to bet? What about you, Weasley? Ron didn't answer. Snape had just awarded Hufflepuff a penalty because George Weasley had hit a bludger at him. Hermione, who had all her fingers crossed in her lap, was squinting fixedly at Harry, who was circling the game like a hawk, looking for the snitch. You know how I think they'll choose people for Gryffindor team? Said Malfoy loudly a few minutes later, as Snape awarded Hufflepuff another penalty for no reason at all. It's people they feel sorry for. See, there's Potter, who's got no parents, and then there's the Weasleys, who've got no money. You should be on the team, Longbottom. You've got no brains. Neville went bright red, but turned in his seat to face Malfoy. I'm worth 12 of you, Malfoy, he stammered. Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle howled with laughter, but Ron, still not daring to take his eyes off the game, said, You tell him, Neville. Longbottom, if brains were gold, you'd be poorer than Weasley, and that's saying something. Ron's nerves were already stretched to the breaking point with anxiety about Harry. I'm warning you, Malfoy. One more word. Ron, said Hermione suddenly. Harry! What? Where? Harry had suddenly gone into a spectacular dive, which drew gasps and cheers from the crowd. Hermione stood up, her crossed fingers in her mouth, as Harry streaked towards the ground like a bullet. You're in luck, Weasley. Potter's obviously spotted some money on the ground, said Malfoy. Ron snapped. Before Malfoy knew what was happening, Ron was on top of him, wrestling him to the ground. Neville hesitated and then clambered over the back of his seat to help. Come on, Harry, Hermione screamed, leaping from her seat to watch as Harry sped straight at Snape. She didn't even notice Malfoy and Ron rolling around under her seat, or the scuffles and yelps coming from the whirl of fists that was Neville, Crabbe and Goyle. Up in the air, Snape turned on his broomstick just in time to see something scarlet shoot past him, missing him by inches. Next second, Harry had pulled out of the dive, his arm raised in triumph, the snitch clasped in his hands. The stands erupted. It had been a record. No one could ever remember the snitch being caught so quickly. Ron, where are you? The game's over. Harry's won. We've won. Gryffindor are in the lead, shrieked Hermione, dancing up and down in her seat and hugging Parvati Patil in the row in front. Harry jumped off his broom a foot from the ground. He couldn't believe it. He'd done it. The game was over, and it barely lasted 5 minutes. As Gryffindors came spilling onto the pitch, he saw Snape land nearby, white-faced and tight-lipped. Then Harry felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up at Dumbledore's smiling face. Well done, said Dumbledore quietly, so that only Harry could hear. Nice to see you haven't been brooding about that mirror. Been keeping busy. Excellent. Snape spat bitterly on the ground. Harry left the changing room alone sometime later to take his Nimbus 2000 back to the broom shed. He couldn't ever remember feeling happier. He'd really done something to be proud of now. No one could say he was just famous name anymore. The evening air had never smelled so sweet. He walked over the damp grass, reliving the last hour in his head, which was a happy blur. Gryffindors running to lift him onto their shoulders, Ron and Hermione in the distance, jumping up and down. Ron cheering through a heavy nosebleed. Harry had reached the shed. He leant against the wooden door and looked up at Hogwarts, with its windows glowing red in the setting sun. Gryffindor in the lead. He'd done it. He'd shown Snape. And speaking of Snape, a hooded figure came swiftly down the front steps of the castle, clearly not wanting to be seen. It walked as fast as possible towards the Forbidden Forest. Harry's victory faded from his mind as he watched. He recognized the figure's prowling walk. Snape, sneaking into the forest while everyone else was at dinner. What's going on? Harry jumped back on his Nimbus 2000 and took off. Gliding silently over the castle, he saw Snape enter the forest at a run, and he followed. The trees were so thick he couldn't see where Snape had gone. He flew in circles, lower and lower, brushing the top branches of the trees until he heard voices. He glided towards them and landed noiselessly in a towering beech tree. He climbed carefully along one of the branches, holding tight to his broomstick, trying to see through the leaves. Below, in a shadowy clearing, stood Snape, but he wasn't alone. Quirrell was there too. Harry couldn't make out the look on his face, but he was stuttering worse than ever. Harry strained to catch what they were saying. Don't know why you wanted to meet me here of all places, Severus. Oh, I thought we'd keep this private, said Snape, his voice icy. Students aren't supposed to know about the Philosopher's Stone after all. Harry leant forward. Quirrell was mumbling something. Snape interrupted him. Have you found out about how to get past that beast of Hagrid's yet? But Severus, You don't want me as your enemy, Quirrell, said Snape, taking a step toward him. I don't know what you... You know perfectly well what I mean. An owl hooted loudly and Harry nearly fell out of the tree. He steadied himself in time to hear Snape say, Your little bit of hocus pocus, I'm waiting. But I don't... Very well, Snape cut in. We'll have another little chat soon, when you've had some time to think things over and decided where your loyalties lie. He threw his cloak over his head and strode out of the clearing. It was almost dark now, but Harry could see Quirrell standing quite still, as though he was petrified. Harry, where have you been? Hermione squeaked. We won! You won! We won! Shouted Ron, thumping Harry on the back. And I gave Malfoy a black eye and Neville tried to take on Crabbe and Goyle single-handedly. He's still out in the cold, but Madame Pomfrey says he'll be alright. Oh, he's still out cold, but Madame Pomfrey says he'll be alright. Talk about showing Slytherin. Everyone's waiting for you in the common room. We're having a party. Fred and George stole some cakes and stuff from the kitchens. Never mind that now, said Harry breathlessly. Let's find an empty room. You wait till you'll hear this. He made sure Peeves wasn't inside before shutting the door behind them. Then he told them what he had seen and heard. So we were right. It is the Philosopher's Stone, and Snape's trying to force Quirrell to help him get it. He asked as if he knew how to get past Fluffy, and he said something about Quirrell's hocus pocus. I reckon there are other things guarding the stone apart from Fluffy. Loads of enchantments, probably. And Quirrell would have done some anti-dark art spells, which Snape needs to break through. So you mean the stone's only safe as long as Quirrell stands up to Snape? Said Hermione in alarm. It'll be gone by next Tuesday, said Ron. I don't know why, but my chat has just crashed. Give me a second. Oh, that's not good. For some reason, thanks OBS, for some reason, my chat dock has just died. Brilliant. Thanks Twitch. Thanks OBS. So, let me do a cheating method. Let me do this, this, and this. Okay. Oh, and just like that, my chat dock is back. Never mind. OBS was temporarily broken. It's no longer broken. Large. Everything's refreshed. We're good. Don't know why. But anyways. Chapter 14. Norbert the Norwegian Ridgeback. Just click that. Fantastic. Okay. Yes. Chapter 14. Norbert the Norwegian Ridgeback. Quirrell, however, must have been braver than they'd thought. In the weeks that followed, he did seem to be getting paler and thinner, but it seems as though he'd cracked. It seems as though he'd cracked yet. Didn't look like he'd cracked yet. Can't read. Every time they passed the third floor corridor, Harry, Ron, and Hermione would press their ears to the door to check that Fluffy was still growling inside. Snape was sweeping about as usual, bad temper, which surely meant that the stone was still safe. Whenever Harry passed Quirrell, these days he gave him an encouraging sort of smile, and Ron had started telling people off for laughing at Quirrell's stutter. Hermione, however, had more on her mind than the Philosopher's Stone. She had started drawing up revision time tables and colour-coding all of her notes. Harry and Ron wouldn't have minded, but she kept nagging them to do the same. Hermione, the exams are ages away. 10 weeks, Hermione snapped. That's not ages. That's like a second to Nicholas Flamel. But we're not 600 years old, Ron reminded her. Anyway, what are you revising for? You already know it all. What am I revising for? Are you mad? You realise we need to pass these exams to get into the second year. They're very important. I should have started studying a month ago. I don't know what's got into me. Unfortunately, the teachers seemed to be thinking along the same lines as Hermione. They piled so much homework on them that the Easter holidays weren't really as much as fun as the Christmas ones. It was hard to relax with Hermione next to you reciting the 12 uses of dragon's blood, or practicing wand movements, moaning and yawning. Harry and Ron spent most of their free time in the library with her, trying to get through all of their extra work. I'll never remember this, Ron burst out one afternoon, throwing down his quill and looking longly out the library window. It was the first really fine day they've had in months. The sky was clear, forget-me-not blue, and there was feeling in the air of summer coming. Harry, who was looking up Dittany in 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi, didn't look up until he heard Ron say, Hagrid, what are you doing in the library? Hagrid shuffled into view, hiding something behind his back. He looked very out of place in his moleskin overcoat. Just looking, he said, in a shifty voice that got their interests at once. And what are you lot up to? He looked suddenly suspicious. You're not still looking for Nicholas Flamel, are you? Oh, we found out who he is ages ago, said Ron impressively. And we know about what the dog's guarding. It's the Philosopher's Stone. Shh, shh, shh. Hagrid looked around quickly to see if anyone was listening. Don't you go be shouting about that. What's the matter with you? There's a few things we wanted to ask you about what's the matter of fact. There are a few things we wanted to ask you as a matter of fact, said Harry. About what's guarding the stone apart from Fluffy. Shh, 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 said Hagrid again. Listen, come and see me later. I'm not promising I'll tell you anything, mind. But don't go rabbiting about it in here. Students aren't supposed to know you. They'll think I've told you. See you later then, said Harry. Hagrid shuffled off. What was he hiding behind his back? Said Hermione thoughtfully. Do you think it had anything to do with the stone? I'm going to see what section he was in, said Ron, who had enough of working. He came back a minute later with a pile of books in his arms and slammed them down on the table. Dragons, he whispered. Hagrid was looking up stuff about dragons. Look at these. Dragon species of Great Britain and Ireland. From Egg to Inferno. A Dragon Keeper's Guide. Hagrid's always wanted a dragon. He told me the first time I ever met him, said Harry. But it's against our laws, said Ron. Dragon breeding was outlawed by the Warlocks Convention of 1709. Everyone knows that. It's hard to stop muggles noticing us if we're keeping dragons on the back garden. Anyway, you can't tame dragons. It's dangerous. You should see the burns Charlie's got off wild ones in Romania. But there aren't wild ones in Britain, said Harry. Of course there are, said Ron. Common Welsh green and Hebridean blacks. The Ministry of Magic has a job hushing them up, I can tell you. Our lot have to keep putting spells on muggles who spotted them to make them forget. So what on earth's Hagrid up to? Said Hermione. When they knocked on the door of the gamekeeper's hut an hour later, they weren't surprised to see that all the curtains were closed. Hagrid called, Who is it? before they let him in. Before he let them in and shut the door quickly behind them. It was stifling hot inside. Even though it was such a warm day, there was a blazing fire on the grate. Hagrid made them tea and offered them stoat sandwiches, which they refused. So, you're wanting to ask me something? Yes, said Harry. There's no point in beating around the bush. We were wondering if you could tell us what's guarding the Philosopher's Stone apart from Fluffy. Hagrid frowned at him. Of course I can't, he said. Number 1, I don't know myself. Number 2, you know too much already, so I wouldn't tell you if I could. That stone's here for good. That stone's here for a good reason. It was almost stolen out of Gringotts. I suppose you've worked that out and all. Beats me how you even know about Fluffy. Oh, come on, Hagrid. You might not want to tell us, but you do know. You know everything that goes on around here, said Hermione in a warm, flattering voice. Hagrid's beard twitched, and they could tell he was smiling. We only wondered who had done the guarding, really. Hermione went on. We wondered who Dumbledore had trusted enough to help him apart from you. Hagrid's chest swelled at the last words. Harry and Ron beamed at Hermione. Well, I don't suppose it could hurt telling you that. Let's see. He borrowed Fluffy from me. Then some of the teachers did enchantments. Professor Sprout, Professor Flitwick, Professor McGonagall. He ticked them off on his fingers. Professor Quirrell, and Dumbledore himself did something, of course. Hang on, I've forgotten someone. Oh yeah, Professor Snape. Snape? Yeah. You're not still on about that, are you? Look, Snape helped protect the stone. He's not about to steal it. Harry knew Ron and Hermione were thinking the same as he was. If Snape had been in on the protecting the stone, it must have been easy to find out how the other teachers had guarded it. He probably knew everything, except, it seems, Quirrell's spell about how to get past Fluffy. You're the only one who knows about how to get past Fluffy, aren't you, Hagrid? Said Harry anxiously. And you wouldn't tell anyone, would you? Not even one of the teachers. Not a soul knows except me and Dumbledore, said Hagrid proudly. Well, that's something, Harry muttered to the others. Hagrid, can we have a window open? I'm boiling. Can't, Harry, I'm sorry, said Hagrid. Harry noticed him glance at the fire. Harry looked at it too. Hagrid, what is that? But he already knew what it was. In the very heart of the fire, underneath the kettle, was a huge black egg. Ah, said Hagrid, fiddling nervously with his beard. That's, Where did you get that, Hagrid? Said Ron, crouching over the fire to get a closer look at the egg. It must have cost you a fortune. Won it, said Hagrid. Last night, I was down at the village having a few drinks and got into a game of cards with an old stranger. Think he was quite glad to get rid of it, to be honest. But what are you going to do with it when it's hatched? Said Hermione. Well, I've been doing some reading, said Hagrid, pulling a large book from under his pillow. Got this out the library. Dragon breeding for pleasure and profit. It's a bit out of date, of course, but it's all in here. Keep the egg in fire, 'cause the mothers breathe on 'em. See, and when it hatches, feed it on a bucket of brandy mixed with chicken blood every half an hour. And see here how to recognise different eggs. What I've got there is a Norwegian Ridgeback. They're rare, them. He looked very pleased with himself, but Hermione didn't. Hagrid, you live in a wooden house, she said. But Hagrid wasn't listening. He was humming merrily as he stoked the fire. So now they had something else to worry about. What might happen to Hagrid if anyone found out he was hiding an illegal dragon in his hut? Wonder what it's like to have a peaceful life, Ron sighed, as evening after evening they struggled through all the extra homework they were getting. Hermione had now started making revision timetables for Harry and Ron too. It was driving them mad. Then, one breakfast time, Hedwig brought Harry another note from Hagrid. He had written only 2 words. It's hatching. Ron wanted to skip herbology and go straight down to the hut. Hermione wouldn't hear of it. Hermione, how many times in our lives are we going to see a dragon hatching? We've got lessons. We'll get into trouble. And that's nothing what Hagrid's got going to be in when some... And that's nothing to what Hagrid's going to be in when someone finds out what he's doing. Shut up, Harry whispered. Malfoy was only a few feet away, and he hadn't stopped dead to listen. How much had he heard? Harry didn't like the look on Malfoy's face at all. Ron and Hermione argued all the way to herbology, and in the end, Hermione agreed to run down to Hagrid's with the other two during the morning break. When the bell sounded from the castle at the end of their lesson, the three of them dropped their trowels at once and hurried through the grounds to the edge of the forest. Hagrid greeted them, looking flushed and excited. "It's nearly out," he ushered them inside. The egg was lying on the table. There were deep cracks in it. Something was moving inside. A funny clicking noise was coming from it. They all drew their chairs up to the table and watched with bated breath. All at once there was a scraping noise. And the egg split open. The baby dragon flopped onto the table. It wasn't exactly pretty. Harry thought it looked like a crumpled black umbrella. Its spiny wings were huge compared to its skinny jet body, and it had long snout with wide nostrils, stubs of horns and bulging orange eyes. It sneezed. A couple of sparks flew out of its snout. "Isn't he beautiful?" Hagrid murmured. He reached out a hand to stroke the dragon's head. It snapped at his finger, showing pointed fangs. "Bless him, look, he knows his mummy," said Hagrid. "Hagrid," said Hermione, "how fast do Norwegian ridgebacks grow exactly?" Hagrid was about to answer when the colour suddenly drained from his face. He leapt to his feet and ran to the window. "What's the matter?" "Someone was looking through the gap of the curtains. It's a kid. He's running back up to the school." Harry bolted to the door and looked out. Even at a distance, there was no mistaking him. Malfoy had seen the dragon. Something about the smile lurking on Malfoy's face during the next week made Harry, Ron, and Hermione very nervous. They spent most of their free time in Hagrid's darkened hut, trying to reason with him. "Just let him go," Harry urged. "Set him free." "I can't," said Hagrid. "He's too little. He'll die." They looked at the dragon. It had grown 3 times in length in just a week. Smoke kept furling out of his nostrils. Hagrid hadn't been doing his gamekeeping duties because the dragon was keeping him so busy. There were empty brandy bottles and chicken feathers all over the floor. "I decided to call him Norbert," said Hagrid, looking at the dragon with misty eyes. "He really knows me now. Watch. Norbert! Norbert, where's Mummy?" "He's lost his marbles," Ron muttered in Harry's ear. "Hagrid," said Harry loudly, "give it a fortnight and Norbert's going to be as long as your house. Malfoy could go to Dumbledore at any moment." Hagrid bit his lip. I know I can't keep him forever, but I just can't dump him, can I?" Harry suddenly turned to Ron. "Charlie," he said. "You're losing it too," said Ron. "I'm Ron, remember?" "No, Charlie, your brother, Charlie, in Romania, studying dragons. We could send Norbert to him. Charlie can take care of him and put him back in the wild." "Brilliant," said Ron. "How about that, Hagrid?" And in the end, Hagrid agreed that they could send an owl to Charlie to ask him. The following week dragged by. Wednesday night found Hermione, Harry, sitting alone in the common room, long after everyone else had gone to bed. The clock on the wall had just chimed midnight when the portrait hole burst open. Ron appeared out of nowhere as he pulled off Harry's invisibility cloak. He had been down at Hagrid's hut helping him feed Norbert, who was now eating dead rats by the crate. "It bit me," he said, showing them his hand, which was wrapped in a bloody handkerchief. "I'm not going to be able to hold a quill for a week. I tell you, that dragon's the most horrible animal I've ever dealt with. But the way Hagrid goes on about it, you'd think it was a fluffy little bunny rabbit. When it bit me, he told me off for frightening it. And when I left, he was singing it a lullaby." There was a tap on the dark window. "It's Hedwig," said Harry, hurrying to let her in. "She'll have Charlie's answer." The 3 of them put their heads together and read the note. "Dear Ron, how are you? Thanks for the letter. I'd be glad to take the Norwegian Ridgeback, but it won't be easy getting him here. I think the best thing will be to send him over with some friends of mine who are coming to visit me next week. Trouble is, they mustn't be seen carrying an illegal dragon. Could you get the Ridgeback up the tallest tower at midnight on Saturday? They can meet you there and take him away while it's dark. Send me an answer as soon as possible. Love, Charlie." They looked over at each other. "We've got the invisibility cloak," said Harry. "It shouldn't be too difficult. I think the cloak's big enough to cover 2 of us and Norbert." It was a mark of how bad the last week had been that the other two agreed with him. Anything to get rid of Norbert and Malfoy. There was a hitch. By the next morning, Ron's bitten hand had swollen to twice its usual size. He didn't know whether it was safe to go to Madame Pomfrey. Would recognise a dragon bite. By the afternoon, though, he had no choice. The cut had turned a nasty shade of green. It looked as if Norbert's fangs were poisonous. Harry and Hermione rushed into the hospital wing at the end of the day to find Ron in a terrible state in bed. "It's not just my hand," he whispered, "although it feels like it's about to fall off. Malfoy told Madame Pomfrey he wanted to borrow one of my books so he could come and have a laugh at me. He kept threatening to tell what really bit me. I've told her it was a dog, but I don't think she believes me. I shouldn't have hit him at Quidditch match. That's why he's doing this." Harry and Hermione tried to calm Ron down. "It'll all be over at midnight on Saturday," said Hermione. But this didn't soothe Ron at all. On the contrary, he sat bolt upright and broke into a sweat. "Midnight on Saturday," he said in a hoarse voice. Oh no, I've just remembered. Charlie's letter was in that book. Malfoy's took. He's going to know we're getting rid of Norbert." Harry and Hermione didn't get a chance to answer. Madame Pomfrey came over at that moment and made them leave, saying Ron needed sleep. "It's too late to change the plan now," Harry told Hermione. "We haven't got time to send Charlie another owl, and this could be our only chance to get rid of Norbert. We'll have to risk it, and we have to get the invisibility cloak. Malfoy doesn't know about that." They found Fang, the boarhound, sitting outside with a bandaged tail. When they went to tell Hagrid, who opened a book, to talk to them. "I won't let you in," he puffed. "Norbert's at a tricky stage. Nothing can't handle." When they told him about Charlie's letter, his eyes filled with tears, although that might have been because Norbert had just bitten him on the leg. "Ah, it's all right. You only got me, Boot. Just playing. He's only a baby after all." The baby banged its tail on the wall, making the windows rattle. Harry and Hermione walked back to the castle, feeling Saturday couldn't come quickly enough. They would have felt sorry for Hagrid when the time came, for him to say goodbye to Norbert if they hadn't been so worried about what they had to do. It was a dark, very dark, cloudy night, and they were a bit late arriving at Hagrid's hut because they had to wait for Peeves to get out of their way in the entrance hall, where he'd been playing tennis against the wall. Hagrid had Norbert packed and ready in a large crate. "He's got lots of rats and some brandy for the journey," said Hagrid in a muffled voice. "And I've packed his teddy bear in case he gets lonely." From inside the crate came ripping noises that sounded to Harry as though the teddy was having its head torn off. "Bye-bye, Norbert," Hagrid sobbed, as Harry and Hermione covered the crate with the invisibility cloak and stepped underneath it themselves. "Mummy will never forget you." How they managed to get the crate back up to the castle, they never knew. Midnight ticked nearer as they heaved Norbert up the marble staircase in the entrance hall, and along the dark corridors, up another staircase, then another. Even one of Harry's shortcuts didn't make the work much easier. "Nearly there," Harry panted as they reached the corridor beneath the tallest tower. Then, a sudden movement ahead of them made them almost drop the crate. Forgetting that they were already invisible, they shrank into the shadows, staring at the dark outlines of two people grappling with each other 10 feet away. A lamp flared. Professor McGonagall, in a tartan dressing gown and a hairnet, had Malfoy by the ear. "Detention," she shouted, "and 20 points from Slytherin. Wandering around in the middle of the night. How dare you? You don't understand, Professor. Harry Potter's coming. He's got a dragon." "What utter rubbish. How dare you tell such lies? Come on. I shall see Professor Snape about you, Malfoy." The steep spiral staircase up to the top of the tower seemed the easiest thing in the world after that. Not until they stepped out into the cold night air did they throw off the cloak, glad to be able to breathe properly again. Hermione did a sort of jig. Imagine being so cozy, all of chat dozes off. I sure hope people are comfy. I really do. I really do. "Malfoy's got detention. I could sing." "Don't," Harry advised her. Chuckling about Malfoy, they waited, Norbert thrashing about in his crate. About 10 minutes later, 4 broomsticks came swooping down from out the darkness. Charlie's friends were a cheery lot. They showed Harry and Hermione the harness they'd rigged up, so they could suspend Norbert between them. They all helped buckle Norbert safely in, and then Harry and Hermione shook hands with others, thanked them very much. At last, Norbert was going, gone. They slipped back down the spiral staircase, their hearts as light as their hands. Now that Norbert was off them, no more dragon. Malfoy in detention? What could spoil their happiness? The answer to that was waiting at the foot of the stairs. As they stepped into the corridor, Filch's face loomed suddenly out of the darkness. Well, 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 he whispered. We are in trouble. They'd left the invisibility cloak on the top of the tower. And I think we're going to leave it there because now we are on chapter 15.